Tonight, we begin a quiet journey into stillness. You do not need to learn, achieve, or prove anything here. This is not a lesson to master or a method to memorize. These are whispers of ancient wisdom, reminders of the peace that has always lived within you. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders relax. Let your thoughts float like clouds across an open sky. There's nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do. Just rest and allow your spirit to soften. Zen teaches us that peace isn't something we must create. It's something we uncover, like a clear mountain lake revealed once the mud settles. Our minds, too, become cloudy only when we struggle against life. When we stop grasping, stop resisting, clarity returns on its own. So breathe slowly. Feel your body grow heavier. Let this story carry you inward toward the stillness that cannot be burned away. If this journey brought you peace, remember to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a moment of stillness. Stay till the end and let the calm unfold. In a quiet mountain monastery, far beyond the noise of cities, lived a monk named Zen. He was known across the land for his immense collection of sacred writings, rare Buddhist sutras, ancient commentaries, and poetry of enlightenment. For over 40 years, Zen had gathered these works with devotion. His library was unlike any other tall wooden shelves carved by hand, lined with scrolls wrapped in silk. The faint scent of cedar mixed with the sweetness of aged parchment. Morning light streamed through paper windows, painting the room in golden warmth. Each dawn, before the monastery awoke, Zen would sit within this library reading by candlelight, whispering to the wisdom of centuries. This was his sanctuary, his temple within a temple. But one night in late autumn, while the monks slept, the unthinkable happened. A fierce mountain wind carried sparks from a nearby lantern. Within moments, flames devoured the dry timbers of the monastery. The fire spread swiftly, roaring through the halls like a living creature. The monks escaped unharmed, yet there was no time to save anything else. They stood beneath the cold stars, watching their home, and Zen's beloved library burn to the ground. Scroll after scroll, page after page, 40 years of care and preservation turned to ash before their eyes. When dawn finally came, the smoke still rose from the ruins. The monks gathered silently, their hearts heavy with grief. They turned to their master, expecting tears, despair, perhaps even anger. But Zen sat upon a stone, facing the blackened remains. His expression was serene, calm as if the rising smoke were incense from a morning ritual. One young monk approached, trembling. "Master," he said softly, "how can you be so calm? Everything you built, everything you loved, it's all gone." Zen looked at the boy with eyes full of compassion. He smiled gently. "My dear one," he said, placing a hand over his heart. "The teachings written in those books were beautiful, but they were only reflections, not the truth itself. Fire can burn paper, but it cannot burn wisdom. The real Dharma has never been bound by ink or scroll. It lives here." He touched his chest. "And here," he said, touching the young monk's heart. The student persisted, tears in his eyes. "But Master, so much knowledge is lost. The generations to come will never read those sacred words." Zen's smile deepened. "The fire," he said, "has offered us its own teaching. We spend years guarding the finger that points at the moon, forgetting to look up and see the moon itself. Last night, the finger burned away, and now perhaps we can finally see the light it was pointing toward. He rose slowly, brushing the ash from his robe. Yesterday, I was a keeper of books. Today, I am a student of impermanence. The fire has not destroyed anything real. It has only revealed what cannot be destroyed. Days passed. The monks rebuilt their home with quiet determination, yet something had changed. Kozen's teachings, once grounded in ancient words, now flowed directly from his experience. He spoke with simplicity and power. His presence itself became a scripture. Students who traveled from distant lands expecting to study sacred texts found something far greater, a living embodiment of the truths those scrolls had tried to capture. Kozen had been liberated by loss. The fire had stripped away his attachment to form and revealed the essence beneath. He was no longer the curator of wisdom. He had become its expression. This story holds a mirror for all of us. Acceptance does not mean pretending to enjoy loss or pretending that pain does not exist. It means allowing what has already happened to simply be, without resistance. In Zen, suffering begins the moment we argue with reality. When we stop struggling against what is, peace arises naturally, the way the sky returns after a storm. The fire that consumed Kozen's library symbolizes every loss we face, the endings, the heartbreaks, the changes we never asked for. Our instinct is to see such moments as disasters. But what if every burning is also a cleansing? What if the flames that take away what we cling to are also freeing us from the weight of that attachment? When the roles we identified with the job, the title, the relationship are stripped away, we often discover something deeper, more enduring, more us. A job lost may reveal a hidden purpose. A broken heart may uncover strength we didn't know we had. Illness may remind us that we are more than the body that carries us. Like Kozen, we may one day realize that what was taken was never truly ours, and what is truly ours can never be taken. So tonight, as you lie here, let go of your grasping. Let go of every thought that says, I must hold on. Let it all burn gently, like old pages turning to light. You do not lose by letting go. You return. You return to what has always been here, the quiet awareness beneath every storm. Breathe in peace. Breathe out resistance. In this silence, you are whole. In this stillness, you are free. The fire has not taken anything away. It has simply shown you what cannot be burned. Sleep deeply, traveler. The truth is safe within you. Take a slow breath in and exhale gently. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the quiet pulse of your heart. Notice how each breath carries away a little more tension, a little more noise. In this calmness, the story continues, and as it unfolds, you may feel your thoughts growing lighter, your spirit more open, your awareness drifting towards something vast and still, a silence that holds you, like the sky holds every cloud. Months passed after the fire. Where once the grand library stood, there was now only a garden of ash and wildflowers. Each morning, the wind carried the scent of earth and smoke, reminding the monks that even from destruction, beauty can bloom. Kozen spent more time outdoors now. He would walk slowly through the courtyard, his hands folded behind his back, his gaze soft, unhurried. The younger monks often followed him at a respectful distance, hoping to absorb even a trace of his quiet presence. He no longer lectured from books or quoted verses. Instead, he spoke through silence, through gestures, through the way he lived each moment. When a monk asked him about enlightenment, Kozen would sometimes point to a falling leaf. When another asked about suffering, he would pour tea and say, "Taste this, the warmth will teach you." His lessons had become life itself, spontaneous, wordless, effortless. Those who listened with their hearts found more wisdom in his stillness than in 100 scrolls of sacred scripture. One evening, the same young monk who had questioned Kosen on the morning after the fire approached him once again. The monk had been struggling not with grief this time, but with confusion. He could not understand how his master remained so peaceful while the world around him continued to change. "Master," he said softly as the two sat beneath a maple tree, "you taught me to accept the fire, and I have tried, but every day brings new losses, new endings. How can we keep finding peace when life keeps taking things away?" Kosen smiled, gazing at the red leaves falling gently to the ground. "Do you see these leaves?" he asked. The monk nodded. "They do not resist the wind," Kosen said. "They do not cling to the branch or curse the season. They fall freely, and in their falling, they complete the purpose for which they were born. Peace," he continued, "does not come from holding on to what we love. It comes from loving fully and still letting go when it is time." The young monk lowered his head, tears shimmering in his eyes. Kosen placed a gentle hand upon his shoulder. "Grief," he said softly, "is not the enemy of peace. It is the doorway to it. To grieve deeply is to love deeply. When love is pure, even loss cannot destroy it. It only transforms it." For a long while they sat in silence, listening to the soft rustle of falling leaves and the evening wind moving through the pines. That night, as the monastery fell quiet, the young monk lay awake beneath the stars. He realized for the first time that nothing in the universe truly ends. It only changes form. The ashes of the burned library had fed the soil. The soil had given rise to flowers. The flowers now swayed gently under the moonlight, each petal carrying the memory of what once was transformed, but not lost. He began to see his own life in the same way. Every loss, every change, every challenge, each was a fire burning away what no longer served him, revealing something new, something true, something eternal beneath the smoke. Years later, when Kosen grew old and his steps became slow, the monks noticed that his presence felt even lighter, as though he was slowly dissolving into the silence he had always spoken of. One morning, as dawn spread across the mountains, the monks gathered in the courtyard. The sky was clear, the air still, and the master stood among them for the last time. He said only a few words. "Do not cling to me, nor to my teachings. The truth is not in the words I spoke, but in the silence between them. If you can rest within that silence, you will find me there always." Later that day, Kosen entered his meditation hall, sat cross-legged on his cushion, and with a calm breath closed his eyes. When the monks checked on him hours later, they found his body perfectly still, a faint smile upon his face. He had slipped gently into the great stillness, as quietly as a candle flame going out. The temple bell rang 3 times, and though sorrow filled the air, so did peace. For every student knew their master had become one with the truth he had lived. And so, as you rest now, remember this. Every ending in your life holds the seed of a beginning. Every loss hides a hidden gift. The fires that burn away what you cling to are not your enemies. They are your teachers. They reveal what cannot be taken: your awareness, your stillness, your unshakable peace. When the noise of the world fades, when everything you once thought defined you has fallen away, What remains is the same truth Kosen discovered. You are not the keeper of wisdom. You are wisdom. You are not the seeker of peace. You are peace. So breathe now. Feel the air entering your lungs, the soft rhythm of life moving through you. Let go of every thought, every plan, every fear. Rest in the silence that exists beyond them all. That silence is home. That silence is truth. That silence is you. Sleep deeply, dear listener. The fires of life have already made you whole. And in this moment, nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be found. Only peace remains. Breathe softly. You have journeyed through the fire. You have walked through the ashes. Now imagine yourself standing on the other side of the mountain. The world feels lighter. The air is cooler. The sky above you, vast, endless, forgiving. It is dawn again, but this time the light feels different, gentler. Not the blazing fire of transformation, but the first whisper of a new beginning. You hear a stream somewhere nearby, the faint trickle of water moving over stones. You follow the sound. Each step feels effortless, like being guided by something ancient that knows exactly where you need to go. After a short walk through a grove of cedar and bamboo, you see it a river, winding gracefully through the valley. Its surface glimmers with early sunlight, and mist rises gently from the water, as if the river itself is breathing. Beside it sits an old monk in a faded robe. He is neither young nor frail, ageless, timeless. His eyes are half closed, reflecting the calm flow before him. You sit down a few feet away, the earth soft beneath you. The monk turns his head slowly, smiles, and without words, gestures toward the water. "This," he finally says, his voice like wind through bamboo, "is the river that remembers." You look closer. The river seems ordinary, yet something about it feels alive, conscious, aware. The current hums softly, whispering memories of rain, mountain, and cloud. Each droplet carries a story of transformation. Nothing in this river is lost. Everything that once was returns, renewed. The monk picks up a single leaf and drops it gently into the stream. "Watch," he says. The leaf drifts, caught for a moment in a small whirlpool, then freed again, continuing downstream. "That leaf," he continues, "is like every thought, every emotion, every moment of your life. It arises, dances for a time, then moves on. Only when you try to hold it still to stop the flow does suffering begin." You nod silently, watching the current. It moves without hesitation, without plan, without resistance. It does not fight the rocks in its path. It flows around them. It does not fear the waterfall ahead. It simply becomes it. "This," the monk says softly, "is what it means to live awake. Not to control the flow of life, but to trust it. To know that even if you cannot see where it leads, you are always being carried home." He dips his hand into the river and lifts a handful of water. The sunlight glimmers through his fingers as the water escapes and falls back. "See?" he smiles. "You can't hold water, but you can feel its coolness. You can let it refresh you, then let it go." He looks at you, eyes filled with a gentle clarity. You are not separate from this river. You are part of its flow. Your memories, your dreams, your joys, your losses, they all return to this great current of being. Even when you forget who you are, the river remembers. You close your eyes. You feel the rhythm of the water merging with your breath. Inhale, the river flows in. Exhale, the river flows out. You realize that the same life that moves the river moves through you. Your thoughts rise and fall like waves. Your emotions ripple and settle like eddies in the current. But beneath it all, there is something still, something vast and silent. That silence is not the absence of life. It is life itself. It is the space in which everything appears and disappears, just as the river holds every wave yet remains whole. And in that silence, you understand. You do not need to search for peace. Peace has been flowing through you all along. It was never lost, only hidden beneath the noise of resistance. As the sun climbs higher, the monk rises slowly. He looks at the river one last time, then at you. When Kosen's library burned, he says, the fire taught him to let go. When you find your own river, it will teach you to flow. Both are the same lesson, two paths, one truth. He begins to walk away, his figure slowly fading into the morning mist, but his final words linger in the air like a blessing. Remember this, the fire purifies, the river renews, and both lead you back to yourself. Now, feel your own river again, your breath. Each inhale, a wave rising. Each exhale, a wave returning to the sea. If thoughts appear, let them drift away. If emotions surface, let them pass through. You do not need to fix or chase anything, simply float. The river carries you safely. The current knows the way home. You are weightless, peaceful, free. Let go of everything that tries to hold you above the surface. Sink gently into the calm beneath all movement. There, in that still depth, you will find rest. You will find silence. You will find yourself. Tonight, the river remembers you and welcomes you home. Sleep deeply, traveler of light. You have returned to the flow. You have become the river. The forest had changed, not in its trees or its colors, but in how it felt. Every leaf, every gust of wind now carried a kind of language, a silent whisper that only the still could hear. The monk walked barefoot along the soft, damp soil. The air smelled of rain and old earth. In his hands, he carried nothing. The bowl he once used to beg with was gone. His robes now faded to the color of sand. Yet his face held a quiet radiance, like someone who had seen beyond the edge of illusion and found something wordless waiting there. For days, he hadn't spoken. For nights, he hadn't dreamed. It wasn't that his thoughts had stopped. They had simply become transparent, like clouds that no longer block the sun. He came upon a river clear, endlessly flowing. Sitting by it, he watched how every drop surrendered itself to the current without hesitation. It reminded him of what his master once said long ago. When you stop fighting the flow, you realize you are the river. He dipped his fingers into the cool water and felt a strange warmth rise inside, not from the body, but from something deeper, a stillness that breathed. And then it came. That same voice, not from outside, not from memory, but from the center of his silence. The world runs in circles, seeking meaning, yet the center never moves. He opened his eyes and looked at the reflection in the water, his own face looking back, shimmering between ripples and light. For the first time, he didn't see himself. He saw everything, the wind, the trees, the mountains, all rising and falling in that reflection. He smiled, because he understood. Nothing was missing. Nothing had ever been missing. The ache for purpose, the chase for peace, the fear of time, all illusions of a restless mind. He leaned back, resting against a moss-covered stone, eyes half closed. The world continued, birds singing, water moving, life breathing, and yet, inside, there was no movement at all, just presence. That night, As the stars scattered across the dark sky, he whispered only one thing before drifting into sleep. "I have reached the place where seeking ends." And in that silence, the forest exhaled with him one breath, one being, one infinite calm. Dawn rose softly, as if afraid to disturb the silence. Mist hovered over the ground like a veil, and the first light of the sun spilled gold across the trees. The monk sat beneath a Bodhi tree, motionless, not out of discipline, but because there was nowhere else to go. He breathed as the world breathed. He existed as existence itself. And then, faintly, he heard it. A sound breaking the rhythm of the morning. Hurried footsteps on dry leaves, stumbling, uneven. From behind the trees emerged a young traveler, dusty and exhausted, his clothes torn by branches, his eyes filled with a familiar unrest, the look of someone chasing something they could not name. He stopped when he saw the monk. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the traveler said, breathless, "I've been searching for days. They told me there's a holy man in these woods, someone who's seen truth." The monk didn't reply. He simply looked at the young man, not with judgment, not even curiosity, but with a depth so calm that it made the traveler's words feel suddenly small. Unable to bear the silence, the traveler spoke again. "Please, tell me what you found. I've read scriptures, meditated, fasted, but peace escapes me. What am I missing?" The monk smiled faintly, as if remembering something distant. He pointed to the river nearby. "Do you see the water?" The traveler nodded. "It flows endlessly," said the monk, "yet it never clings to the stones it touches. You hold on too tightly to ideas, to failures, to the image of who you think you are." The traveler frowned. "But if I let go of everything, what will be left of me?" The monk closed his eyes. "Only what has always been there before your thoughts began, before your name was given, before you called this search a path." The traveler sat down beside him, unsure whether to understand or to weep. The monk handed him a small bowl of water from his satchel. The traveler drank it as if it were the first drop of rain in years. Then the monk said softly, "Peace is not found, it is remembered." Those words echoed inside the traveler like thunder rolling through distant mountains. The forest around them seemed to listen. Even the wind had grown still. The monk then reached into the dust and drew a circle on the ground. "This is the world," he said, "always moving, always changing. And this," he touched the unmoving center, "is you, the still point within. If you live from here, no storm can touch you." The traveler stared at the circle for a long time. Something in him broke, not in pain, but in release. The weight he carried in his chest began to dissolve. Tears fell silently, not from sorrow, but from remembering. The monk said nothing more. He simply watched the sun climb higher, lighting up the path the traveler had come from. When the young man finally rose to leave, he bowed deeply and whispered, "Thank you." The monk only smiled and said, "Don't thank me. Thank the silence between us. It did the real teaching." The traveler walked away, his steps lighter, his shadow softer. And when he looked back one last time, the monk was gone, as if he had never been there at all. Only the whisper of wind through the trees and the sound of the river endlessly flowing. Days turned into weeks as the traveler made his way down from the mountain. Each step felt lighter than the one before, as though some invisible chain had been quietly removed. The road he once feared seemed to welcome him now. The trees no longer loomed as shadows, they stood as witnesses. There was no sudden enlightenment, no dramatic vision, only a quiet, expanding stillness that followed him everywhere. At night, he would sit beside small village fires. People would ask, "Where have you come from?" And he would simply smile and answer, "From silence." They would laugh politely, not understanding, but something in his calmness disarmed their doubts. When he finally reached his village, it looked unchanged, the same narrow streets, the same noise of the marketplace, the same endless arguments about grain, weather, and politics. Yet to him, everything felt different. The same old sounds no longer pierced his mind. They simply passed through like wind through bamboo. He saw his old friends. Some greeted him with joy. Others questioned his long absence. One of them, a merchant, said sharply, "You've wasted months wandering in the mountains. Did you at least find what you were looking for?" The traveler looked at him, smiling softly. "I lost what I didn't need to find." The merchant frowned. "You speak in riddles." "Perhaps," said the traveler, "but the truth often sounds like one until you live it." That night, as the village slept, the traveler sat alone beneath a tree, the same way he had seen the monk sit by the river. The moonlight shimmered over his face. A small child, curious and sleepless, approached him. "Sir," the boy whispered, "my father says monks and wanderers are people who've run away from the world. Is that true?" The traveler looked up at the stars before answering. "No, child, they are people who stopped running inside." The boy thought about it for a moment, then asked, "What did you see up there in the mountains?" The traveler smiled. "I saw a fire once, and I thought it was destruction, but it was teaching me to see what remains after the fire goes out." The boy blinked. "What remains?" The traveler placed a gentle hand on the boy's chest. "This, what never burns." For the first time, the child didn't ask another question. He simply sat down beside him and looked at the stars. In that quiet, something sacred passed between them, not as words, but as stillness. Weeks later, villagers began to notice subtle changes. The traveler, once restless and quick-tempered, now moved through life as though guided by an invisible rhythm. When people quarreled, he listened. When they wept, he stayed beside them without offering solutions. Some came to him for advice, expecting clever words or quotes from scripture. But he rarely spoke much. He would say things like, "Sit with your problem until it grows tired of itself." Or, "When the water stops stirring, it reflects everything clearly." They left either puzzled or profoundly comforted, often both. It wasn't that he had become a teacher, it was that he had become transparent. People could see their own peace reflected in him. And though the traveler never returned to the mountain, he carried the silence of that place wherever he went. In the noise of the marketplace, he heard it. In the cries of children, he heard it. In the death of a loved one, he felt it not as loss, but as continuation. One evening, while sitting at the river's edge, an old monk passing through stopped and bowed to him. "I have traveled far," said the monk. "I heard there is a wise man here who found peace without withdrawing from the world. Do you know him?" The traveler smiled faintly and gestured to the flowing river. "I only know this one. It has been teaching me ever since I left the mountains." The monk watched the current for a long time, then nodded in understanding. Without another word, he continued his journey. The traveler remained, listening to the sound of water meeting stone. Each ripple, a reminder that peace was never found in isolation, but in returning to the world with open eyes, seeing that even in the heart of chaos, stillness never leaves. He whispered into the night breeze as if speaking to his old teacher. "Master, the fire did not end your library. It lit my way home." And the river answered, not in words, but in the endless, quiet sound of flowing. The seasons turned slowly in the mountain village. Spring came again, with tender green leaves whispering in the breeze. The traveler's small hut, once on the edge of town, had become a quiet refuge for those seeking rest, not because he invited them, but because peace itself seemed to live there. Each morning, he would sweep the courtyard, light a single candle, and sit by the doorway, watching the sun spill across the valley. He had no disciples, no temple, no followers yet. People began arriving, one by one. A farmer came first, burdened by debt and sleepless nights. He sat near the traveler in silence for hours. When he finally spoke, he said, "I don't know why, but sitting here, the noise inside me is softer." The traveler smiled and said quietly, "When the wind grows too strong, even the river hides beneath the rocks. It doesn't fight the storm, it simply waits." Another week passed, and a mother arrived, grieving the loss of her child. She knelt before the traveler, her tears falling like rain onto the ground. He didn't comfort her with words. He simply bowed his head and wept with her. When she finally asked, "Will this pain ever end?" he answered, "When the river meets the sea, do you think the water remembers the mountain?" She closed her eyes and felt something shift, not an ending of grief, but an opening within it. Soon, more villagers began to visit, not because they sought miracles, but because the traveler's silence made them feel seen. There were no sermons, no rules, only presence. Sometimes they would sit together, saying nothing, listening to the rustle of trees or the rhythm of their breath. And in that stillness, small transformations began to bloom. The merchant, who once mocked him, now visited every dawn before opening his shop. The woodcutter, known for his temper, began offering free firewood to widows. The children, who once ran wild, started playing quietly near the traveler's hut, pretending to meditate. Peace was spreading not as a command, but as contagion. One evening, the traveler was approached by a young woman carrying a scroll. She had journeyed from a distant monastery that had heard rumors of a man who teaches without teaching. She bowed deeply and said, "Master, I have studied the scriptures since childhood. I've read the sutras, the Upanishads, the commentaries of ancient sages, but still, my mind does not rest. Please, tell me what I'm missing." The traveler looked at her for a long time. Then he gestured to the candle burning between them. "Tell me," he said softly, "when this candle burns, what happens to the flame?" "It gives light," she replied. "And when the candle is finished, the flame disappears," she said. The traveler shook his head. "No, the flame returns to where it always was, the space around it. The wax and wick were never its prison, only its temporary home." She sat in silence, the meaning sinking in slowly that her restless search, her constant effort to contain truth, was the wick that needed to burn away. As months passed, the traveler's name spread to towns beyond the valley. People called him the monk of the wind because he moved through life without resistance. gentle yet unshakable. He would often say to visitors, "Peace is not learned, it is remembered. It was with you before you knew your name." One night, as the monsoon rain fell endlessly, the traveler sat by the window listening. The sound of thunder rolled across the mountains, and suddenly, in a flash of lightning, he saw the reflection of his old teacher Kozen sitting beside him, smiling in silence. It wasn't a vision of the eyes, but a recognition of spirit. He bowed deeply to the empty space, whispering, "Master, your fire still burns, but now it lights 1,000 hearts." He realized then that true teaching was never about passing knowledge. It was about igniting remembrance. In the following years, the village itself transformed quietly. Arguments grew fewer. Laughter lingered longer. The people began lighting candles at dusk, not as a ritual, but as a reminder that even in darkness, there is a light that does not belong to wax or flame. The traveler aged gracefully. His hair turned silver, his steps slower, his smile softer. Yet his presence remained timeless, untouched by years. And one morning, when the sun rose over the eastern ridge, the villagers found him seated beneath the great Bodhi tree, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees, the faintest smile on his lips. He had passed silently in meditation, like a candle that burned to its last moment, leaving behind not smoke, but fragrance. The villagers built no shrine, carved no statue. They simply left his hut as it was open to the wind, filled with stillness. Because they understood what he had taught. The flame was gone, but the light had never left. Years passed, then decades. The little mountain village changed, new homes were built, paths widened, and children who once played under the old Bodhi tree grew into elders with gentle wrinkles and stories that shimmered like candlelight. But even as time reshaped the land, one thing never faded: the memory of the silent traveler who had once lived among them. His small hut still stood at the edge of the valley. No one dared to claim it, for it had become more than wood and stone. It was a place of stillness. Pilgrims who wandered the mountain trails often found themselves drawn there, unaware why. Some said they could feel a strange serenity the moment they stepped near. The wind that passed through the open windows seemed to whisper old lessons, not in words, but in presence. One crisp morning, long after most had forgotten his name, a young monk named Rio arrived in the valley. He had been traveling for months, searching for a place where his restless spirit might find rest. His robe was torn, his feet blistered, his eyes carrying the weariness of too many questions unanswered. When he reached the old hut, he noticed how time had embraced it. Ivy curling around the doorframe, moss painting the stones, silence thicker than any chant. He stepped inside. The air was cool, almost sacred. A faint smell of sandalwood lingered, as if the past had never fully left. In the center of the room sat a single object, a small clay bowl, cracked yet perfectly balanced on a low wooden table. Inside it was a bit of dried wax, as if someone had once extinguished a candle there and never relit it. The monk sat down before it, crossing his legs, letting his body fall into stillness. He had read countless sutras, memorized entire scriptures, and debated with masters in great temples, yet none of it had quieted the noise within him. But here, in this silent hut, surrounded by nothing but the hum of wind and memory, something began to change. His breath slowed, his thoughts softened, the edges of the world blurred. For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to meditate. He was simply being. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, a soft wind entered through the broken window, brushing against his cheek. In that wind, he felt something ancient, as though the mountain itself was breathing with him. A faint image appeared in his mind, an old man sitting under a tree, smiling gently, his eyes filled with infinite peace. Rio whispered without thinking, "Are you the one they call the monk of the wind?" And though no voice answered, a quiet understanding bloomed in his chest. He realized that the peace he sought was not in this hut. It was not left behind by the monk. It had always been within him, waiting to be noticed. The next morning, Rio gathered the villagers. They told him stories, fragments passed down through generations. They spoke of how the monk had once helped a grieving mother find peace without words, how he had calmed storms of anger simply by listening, how he had died sitting upright beneath the Bodhi tree, smiling like one who had just remembered a beautiful secret. Rio bowed deeply. That night, he lit a new candle in the old clay bowl. As the flame flickered, he whispered, "Master of the wind, your silence still speaks." He made a vow not to rebuild the temple, not to carve statues, not to collect disciples, but to carry this stillness wherever he went. Years later, travelers would speak of a young monk who wandered the land barefoot, helping villagers rebuild after storms, teaching children how to listen to the rain, and sitting quietly beside those in sorrow. He never introduced himself as a teacher, but people began to call him the Whisper. Monk, for his words were few, yet they settled deep into the heart. Whenever someone asked where he had learned such peace, he would smile and say, "From a man I never met, who taught without speaking." The legacy of the Wind Monk lived on not through temples or scriptures, but through a lineage of hearts that had tasted stillness. No monuments marked his name, yet his presence became immortal, flowing through the veins of mountains, carried by the breath of wind, and whispered by candles that burned quietly in countless homes. Even now, if one walks into that valley on a moonlit night and listens closely, they might hear the wind moving gently through the trees, not as a sound, but as a feeling. A reminder that nothing truly sacred is ever lost. It only changes form. Just as the flame returns to the space it came from, so too does wisdom return to silence. And in that silence, the Wind Monk still smiles everywhere. 1,000 seasons passed. The mountain remained its ridges, kissed by snow, its roots wrapped in mist. Empires rose and fell in the valleys below, but up here, time had a softer rhythm. The Bodhi tree still stood, though older and hollowed by years of wind and rain. Its roots clung to the earth like ancient fingers remembering the pulse of life. Beneath it, grass grew wild, where once the monk of the wind had meditated in silence. The hut too had mostly surrendered to nature. Its roof had caved in, its walls taken by moss and vines, and yet, if you stood quietly enough, you could still sense the echo of something sacred in the air. The villagers rarely climbed that far anymore. Only the shepherds and wandering pilgrims knew of the old path, a narrow trail that wound up the mountain like a forgotten prayer. One spring morning, as the mist began to lift, a young girl named Sora wandered up that very path. She was no monk, no seeker, just a curious child chasing a stray goat. Her laughter echoed through the valley, light and unguarded. She followed the sound of bells tied around the goat's neck until she reached the clearing where the old Bodhi tree stood. There, she stopped. The world felt different here, quieter, as if the air itself was listening. Sunlight broke through the clouds, falling gently through the branches like threads of gold. Dust shimmered in the light, moving as if alive. The girl felt her heartbeat slow without knowing why. For reasons she could not explain, she sat down beneath the tree. Her goat wandered off, but she didn't follow. Instead, she picked up a fallen leaf and turned it over in her tiny hands, watching how the veins glowed like rivers of light. Then, without trying, she closed her eyes. What she felt in that moment could not be taught in temples or written in scrolls. It was a peace that had no name, a silence that didn't feel empty, but full. The wind brushed her cheek softly, as if recognizing her. It carried with it a faint fragrance, something between sandalwood and rain. Somewhere in the stillness, she thought she heard a whisper, not in words, but in meaning. "Welcome back." Her breath deepened naturally. She didn't know she was meditating. No one had told her how. Yet she entered the same stillness that had once surrounded Kozen, and later the wind monk, and later the whisper monk who carried that flame forward. When she finally opened her eyes, everything looked the same. The grass, the sunlight, the valley below. But something inside her had shifted. The mountain no longer looked like stone. It looked alive. The clouds no longer floated. They danced. The world, for the first time, felt whole. She stood, brushed off the grass, and began her walk back down. As she descended, she felt a strange certainty, though she didn't know what it meant that she would return here often. Years passed, and Sora grew into a young woman. She often climbed to the tree in moments of sadness or confusion. Sometimes she would simply sit in silence. Other times, she would whisper her thoughts to the wind, not expecting answers, but finding peace in the asking. And though she never heard a reply, she always left lighter, as if something unseen had listened with perfect understanding. One day, as she sat under the tree, a wandering monk appeared, old, kind-eyed, dressed in simple robes. He had come from far away, searching for solitude. When he saw Sora sitting there, he bowed and asked, "Do you come here often, child?" Sora smiled and nodded. "It's peaceful here. I don't know why, but when I sit here, everything feels right." The monk gazed around the tree, the wind, the open sky, and smiled. He too could feel it, that same stillness, that same quiet energy that had lingered for centuries. He placed his palms together and whispered, "Ah, so the mountain still remembers." From that day on, Sora and the monk met often. He never taught her formally. They simply shared silence, watching the clouds, the birds, the setting sun. Sometimes they would laugh without reason. Other times they would sit for hours without speaking. In their shared quiet, something invisible was being passed down, the same flame of peace that had burned through generations, wordless, timeless, indestructible. Years later, when the monk passed away under the same Bodhi tree, Sora stayed beside him until dawn. When she finally rose, she lit a small candle in a clay bowl she had brought with her, placing it at the base of the tree. The wind blew softly, not enough to extinguish the flame, just enough to make it dance. She smiled and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me what was never lost." And then, for the first time in centuries, the sound of a bell echoed through the mountain once again. A sound not of mourning, but of awakening. From that day, travelers began coming again. some seeking peace, some seeking answers, and some not knowing what they sought at all. Sora welcomed them with tea, silence, and kindness, the three offerings of her teacher. And as they sat beneath the old Bodhi tree, many of them too felt the same quiet shift, the one that begins not in the mind, but in the heart. Centuries may pass. The mountain will change. The tree may fall and grow again. But what began with a silent monk will never truly end. Because stillness does not die, it only returns. And if you listen carefully tonight, as the wind moves softly past your window, as your breath deepens and your thoughts drift like clouds, you might feel it too. The same silence that once lived on that mountain lives in you now. It always has. It always will. So rest. The mountain is watching over you. The wind remembers your name, and the stillness that began long ago has finally come home. The night was quiet. The stars hung low, shimmering like old memories, each one a whisper of a life once lived, a prayer once spoken. Down in the valley, the wind moved through fields of wild grass, bending them in slow waves that shimmered like liquid silver under the moon. The mountain stood above all, timeless, patient, eternal. And at its heart, beneath the ancient Bodhi tree, a small flame burned. Sora had tended it for years, a single candle, kept alive through storm and silence. She never thought of it as sacred, never called it divine. To her, it was simply a reminder that even the smallest light could outlive darkness, if guarded with love. One evening, as the mist rolled in from the east, Sora felt something shift in the air. The world seemed to pause, the kind of stillness that comes not from silence, but from deep listening. She looked up, and for the first time in her life, she saw the mountain breathe. Not literally, but the air around her moved in rhythm with her heartbeat. The trees swayed in perfect balance. Even the distant sound of running water seemed to slow, as if waiting for something unseen to arrive. Sora closed her eyes. Inside that moment, she felt herself dissolve, not disappearing, but expanding. The boundaries between her breath and the wind faded. Her thoughts became clouds, passing, changing, vanishing. She felt every heartbeat of the earth, every whisper of leaf and stone, every pulse of life woven into a single infinite pattern. There was no separation now, no self to protect, no world to control, only one vast presence, quiet, ancient, aware. And then she heard it again, the voice from long ago, not from outside, but from within. You are not the flame. You are the space it burns in. Tears filled her eyes, though she didn't know why. Perhaps it was love. Perhaps it was memory. Perhaps both were the same thing. In that stillness, she saw them all, the monk of the wind, the whispering sage, the silent one who had once meditated beneath this very tree. They were not gone. They had simply become the silence. And now she was part of it too. When she opened her eyes, the world glowed differently. Every drop of dew reflected 1,000 tiny universes. The night air felt like silk upon her skin. The flame flickered gently beside her, and for the first time, she realized it didn't need her anymore. It could live on its own. She smiled, leaned forward, and whispered softly, "Thank you for teaching me how to listen." And then she let it go. The wind carried the flame upward, not as smoke, but as light. It rose through the branches, spiraling into the stars until it was gone from sight, but not from being. In the village below, People awoke that night feeling strangely peaceful. Some dreamed of clear water, some of soft laughter echoing across mountains. Others simply felt, without knowing why, that something ancient had finally returned home. When dawn came, the air was clearer than it had been in years. Birds sang in soft waves, and the mountain, bathed in gold, seemed to smile. Many generations later, travelers who climbed that path still spoke of the place. They said that when you sit under the Bodhi tree, you don't hear silence, you become it. No one knows Sora's name anymore. The stories have faded into whispers, the path half swallowed by grass and rain. And yet, when the wind moves just right, you can still feel it, a pulse, a warmth, like a breath that never stopped breathing. It's the same flame not in the candle, but in every living thing. Close your eyes now. Breathe. Inhale the same air that touched her face that night. Exhale the same wind that carried the flame to the stars. Listen. There it is, the sound beneath all sounds, the stillness that has never left you. It doesn't speak in words. It doesn't demand belief. It simply waits quietly for you to remember. Because you are not searching for peace. You are made of it. And when you finally stop running, you'll realize you never left the mountain. The story ends here. But the silence continues alive in your breath, in the pause between thoughts, in the space where everything returns to what it has always been, eternal, unbroken, home. The night has deepened, the stars have drifted into their quiet watch, and somewhere in the unseen folds of the universe, a small light moves, not burning, not fading, simply being. It is said that when a flame completes its purpose, it does not vanish, it transforms. It becomes the warmth in every sunrise, the shimmer across the surface of still water, the silent pulse behind every breath. That flame, the one Sora released beneath the ancient Bodhi tree, did not die that night. It became a whisper moving through time. If you listen closely, you can still hear it, not with your ears, but with that quiet space behind your heart. It begins softly, like the sound of a candle inhaling its first breath. Do not search for me in temples of stone, nor in the pages of sacred words. I am not bound by form. I am the space within all things. The whisper moves like wind through reeds, gentle, effortless, knowing. When you sit beneath the open sky, I am the silence between stars. When you breathe in sorrow, I am the stillness that holds your tears. In time, the whisper became a teaching not spoken, but felt. It reached travelers who had lost their way in the mountains, monks who questioned the meaning of their meditation, and wanderers who had long forgotten the sound of their own hearts. To each, the flame spoke differently, but the truth was always the same. You were never lost. You simply forgot how to stand still. One such traveler, a young seeker named Rin, came to the mountains centuries after Sora's time. He had read countless books, memorized sacred verses, and carried scrolls of wisdom in his satchel. But his mind was restless. He felt knowledge without peace, words without weight. He climbed for 3 days through mist and rain until he reached the Bodhi tree. There was no temple now, no relic, no offering, only silence and the faint scent of old cedar. He sat beneath it, weary and confused, and whispered into the wind, "Teach me how to be free." The flame, though unseen, heard his plea. It had watched for ages, not as something separate, but as the quiet awareness within every seeker's heart. That night, The wind stilled, the stars dimmed, and in the hush between breaths, Rin felt a presence beside him, ancient, weightless, luminous. It was not a voice this time. It was understanding, a transmission not through sound, but through being. He felt the earth beneath him, vast and patient. He felt his breath gentle, endless. And then he felt the boundary dissolve the illusion that he was apart from anything. For the first time, he understood. Peace is not found, it is remembered. When morning came, the mist parted to reveal the valley below, endless, golden, breathing. Rin smiled through tears. He unpacked his scrolls and one by one released them into the river. He watched as the ink bled into the current, turning the water into lines of floating poetry. May every word return to silence, he whispered. Years passed. Travelers who came after spoke of a monk who lived in the valley and never preached. He tilled the soil, repaired bridges, and tended the lamps at dusk. And yet, those who met him said they felt lighter afterward, as if they had put down something they didn't know they were carrying. When asked his name, he simply smiled. "I am no one," he said, "just a caretaker of light." But at night, when he sat beside the quiet stream, a soft glow would surround him, and those who saw it said it was as if the flame itself had returned, not as fire, but as presence. Centuries fade, empires rise and fall, mountains erode, rivers change their course. But still the whisper continues. Sometimes it hides in the hush before dawn, sometimes it travels in the breath of wind through pines, sometimes it lives in you in the brief pause between two thoughts. It says, "Do not seek to escape the storm, become the calm that holds it. Do not ask the world to change. Learn to see it as it truly is, infinite, unfolding, whole." Close your eyes now. Feel your breath soft, ancient, circular. Notice the silence that surrounds it. That is not emptiness. It is awareness watching itself. That awareness is the flame. It has no name, no shape, no beginning or end. It is older than the stars, and yet as near as your next inhale. When you breathe, it breathes with you. When you love, it shines through you. When you let go, it sets you free. And so the flame continues not in temples, not in words, but in every quiet heart that dares to listen. It does not ask for worship. It asks only for presence. For in the end, all teachings, all journeys, all seeking lead to the same discovery. You were never the one searching for light. You were the light, learning to see itself. So tonight, as the stars gather like soft embers above, let the whisper of the flame reach you. Let it remind you not of what you must do, but of what you already are. Peace, awareness, infinity in human form. And as you drift into rest, know this truth. The flame has never left you. It only waited for your stillness to remember. The night sky stretched endlessly above, a quiet canvas where even the stars seemed to pause as if listening. In that silence, you could feel something ancient stirring, a vibration older than thought, gentler than breath. It wasn't sound exactly, but presence, a living awareness that hummed softly beneath every heartbeat of the universe. That presence is what the monks once called the sound of stillness. It is not heard through the ears, but through surrender. It begins when the noise within finally bows to silence, when we stop trying to control, fix, or prove anything, and simply allow existence to be what it is. Sora's flame had long since become light in many hearts. Rin's river had carried wisdom across lands unknown, and now, in a distant valley blanketed by mist, a single traveler arrived tired, heart-heavy, and full of questions that life had never answered. He had heard whispers of this valley, a place where silence speaks and the wind itself teaches. He did not come seeking enlightenment, for he had given up on that long ago. He came only to rest. He found a small hut by the river, its lamp glowing faintly through the fog. He entered and found an old monk sitting beside a single candle. The monk looked up and smiled, not as a stranger greeting a guest, but as silence recognizing itself. "Sit," the monk said softly, his voice as calm as falling snow. "You've traveled far enough." The traveler sat, and for a long time neither spoke. The fire crackled, and the river outside whispered against stones. Finally, the traveler sighed. "I have studied so many paths," he said. "I have prayed, meditated, chanted, but my heart is still restless. Why can't I find peace?" The old monk closed his eyes. "Because," he said, "you have been listening to the world, but not to the silence beneath it." The traveler frowned. "What do you mean?" The monk gestured toward the candle flame. "Look at this light," he said. "The flame dances, flickers, and changes shape, yet what allows it to exist?" The traveler thought for a moment. "The air," he said. The monk smiled. "Yes, the unseen supports the seen. The silent gives life to the sound. The formless gives birth to form. But we humans, we chase the dance of the flame and forget the air that holds it." He leaned closer. "True peace is not the absence of thought. It is the space in which thought appears and disappears. When you listen not to the noise, but to the silence between each sound, you begin to hear the eternal." The traveler gazed at the flame, and for the first time noticed the stillness surrounding it, a vast quiet, so complete it seemed to cradle the entire world. The monk spoke again. "Close your eyes," he said. "Listen not to me, but to what exists behind every word I speak." And so the traveler closed his eyes. He listened. At first, he heard the river outside, soft, rhythmic, endless. Then he heard the fire, tiny crackles, small bursts of warmth. And beneath that, he heard his own breath, slow, fragile, human. But soon even those sounds began to fade into something deeper, a kind of quiet hum, a boundless field of presence that stretched far beyond his body, beyond thought, beyond self. It wasn't silence as he once knew it. It was alive. He felt as though every cell in his being was exhaling after years of holding on. His body softened, his mind untangled, his heart felt weightless. Time dissolved. There was no night, no day, no monk, no traveler, only stillness, listening to itself. It was here, in this sacred nothingness, that the traveler finally understood. Peace had never been missing. It was simply waiting for him to stop searching. When he opened his eyes, the candle had burned low. The monk was still, eyes closed, breathing softly in harmony with the room itself. The traveler bowed his head. "Thank you, Master," he whispered. But the monk did not reply. He simply smiled, as though the question had never existed at all. That night, the traveler slept with the ease of a child resting in his mother's arms. And as he dreamed, the sound of stillness continued, a soft hum beneath all creation. He dreamed of stars breathing with him, of rivers speaking in light, of mountains rising and dissolving into clouds. He dreamed of himself as wind, as flame, as infinite space. When morning came, the valley was bathed in gold. The traveler woke, not as the person who had arrived, but as silence wearing human form. He understood now why the masters spoke so little. There are truths that words can only weaken. Before leaving, he turned to the monk and asked quietly, "What should I do now?" The monk opened his eyes. "Do?" he repeated, smiling. "Simply be. Carry the silence with you. Let it speak when you cannot. Let it teach when the world forgets." The traveler nodded slowly, and as he walked down the valley, he noticed something astonishing. Every sound was music. Every breeze carried meaning. Every heartbeat echoed eternity. The world had not changed, only his listening had. And so, the sound of stillness continues not as a story, not as a teaching, but as a living pulse within you. Whenever life grows loud and your thoughts begin to storm, close your eyes. Take one slow breath and listen not to what is happening, but to the space that holds it all. There, in that space, you will find the monk. You will find Sora. You will find every flame that ever burned. And most of all, you will find yourself. Because the stillness you seek is the one who is listening now. Pause. Breathe. Let this truth rest in your heart. Peace does not come when the world grows quiet. It comes when you do. As you drift into sleep tonight, let the sound of stillness cradle your thoughts. Let the silence between breaths carry you home. There is nothing left to learn, nothing left to become. You are already the silence that the universe has been trying to remember. Sleep peacefully, dear one. The sound of stillness is already within you. There are moments in life when silence itself begins to breathe. When what you once thought was emptiness reveals itself as something alive, aware, and infinite. And from that infinity, something begins to stir softly at first, like the glow before sunrise. It's not sound, not sight, it's warmth. The kind of warmth that doesn't come from fire or touch, but from the center of being, a quiet radiance that grows from stillness, spreading gently through every cell, every thought, every memory. That warmth is love, but not the kind we read in books or chase in stories. It is the love that simply is. The love that asks for nothing, owns nothing, and yet holds everything. It is the love that arises when the heart finally remembers its true nature. And when that happens, the heart becomes light. In a small village hidden between emerald hills, the traveler from the valley, now older, gentler, walked the quiet path before dawn. His hair had turned silver, but his eyes were clearer than ever, like deep pools reflecting the whole sky. He carried no possessions, no scripture, no robe that marked him as a monk. Only a small lamp, a simple flame enclosed in glass, lit by the same spark that once burned beneath the Bodhi tree generations ago. Wherever he went, people gathered not because he spoke of truth, but because truth spoke through him. He did not teach, he listened. He did not preach, he smiled. And in that smile, the weary found peace, the lost found direction, the fearful found courage. They called him the Silent One, though he often laughed softly when he heard it, for he knew that true silence is not the absence of sound, it is the fullness of love. One day, a young woman came to him, trembling. She had lost everything, her family, her home, her will to live. Her voice was weak as she knelt before him. "Master," she whispered, "they tell me to meditate, to pray, to be strong, but I can't. The pain is too much. My heart feels like it's made of stone. How can I find peace when love has left me?" The Silent One looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Who told you that love has left you?" She looked up, confused. "I watched it die," she said bitterly. "I buried it myself." He shook his head slowly. "You buried the body of a memory," he said softly, "but not love. Love does not die. It only changes its form from what you hold in your hands to what holds you from within." He reached out, touched her trembling hand and continued. "When a seed falls into the earth, it must break to grow. It feels the darkness pressing in, the soil heavy above it, and it thinks it is dying. But in truth, that breaking is its birth. Your heart is the same. Pain is the cracking open that allows light to enter." The woman began to cry not from sorrow, but from recognition. Her tears fell like rain upon dry soil, and something deep inside her stirred a warmth she hadn't felt in years. The Silent One smiled. "You see," he said, "the heart does not need to be fixed. It only needs to be allowed." That night, as she slept, the woman dreamed of the lamp he carried. Its flame did not burn with heat, but with calm radiance, the same gentle glow she felt in her chest when she had finally let go. When she awoke, the Silent One was gone, but his words lingered like soft light on her skin. The years passed. The traveler grew older still, his steps slower, his breaths longer, yet his presence only deepened. Villagers often said that when he walked through the fields, flowers seemed to turn toward him. Birds followed him in the trees, and even the wind softened its voice. But what they felt was not magic. It was resonance. It was what happens when one heart fully remembers its own silence. It radiates peace without trying, because peace has become its nature. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, the Silent One sat by a small river. He had returned to the place where his teacher once lived, the Valley of Stillness. The water shimmered. The air smelled of cedar and wet stone. He watched the reflection of the sunset in the rippling surface and smiled to himself. "I have carried your silence well, old friend," he whispered. "It has become my heart's voice." Then he placed the small lamp beside the riverbank, where the flame flickered softly in the growing dusk. "May this light find new hands," he said quietly, "for love must move to stay alive." As night fell, he closed his eyes and began to breathe with the rhythm of the river. Each inhale became the sound of the tide. Each exhale became the song of the wind. And as his final breath left him, something extraordinary happened. The lamp's flame did not go out. It lifted slowly, rising into the air like a firefly at twilight. Higher, higher it drifted, until it became a single star in the night sky. From that night onward, people in the valley said that whenever grief touched their hearts, a soft light would appear in their dreams, a golden warmth that asked nothing, promised nothing, but brought peace to the restless. They called it the light of the heart. That is what happens when silence blossoms into love. It no longer hides in meditation halls or temples. It moves through every act of kindness, every quiet forgiveness, every breath that asks for nothing in return. Because love is not something you give. It is what you are when you stop pretending to be anything else. So tonight, as you rest, place your hand gently on your heart. Feel that warmth, that pulse. It is not just blood moving through veins. It is light, ancient, boundless, compassionate. It is the same flame that burned beneath the Bodhi tree, the same flame that guided the Silent One through the valley, the same flame that lives in you now. Breathe slowly. Inhale the silence. Exhale the light. With every breath, let your heart become a little brighter. With every heartbeat, let love move outward to the people you miss, to the memories you fear, to the parts of yourself you still hide. Do not hold it back. Light cannot be kept. It must travel. And if one day you feel alone again, remember you are the lamp and the flame. When your heart becomes light, you no longer seek peace. You become peace. You no longer chase love. You are love. And even in the darkest night, your very being whispers to the stars, I am home. I am whole. I am the light I was seeking. When the heart becomes light is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of living it moment by moment, breath by breath, in a world that needs your quiet glow. Sleep now. Let the flame within you rise gently to meet the dawn. Because even when your eyes close, your heart still shines. When the heart becomes light, something beautiful and almost imperceptible begins to happen. You stop moving through the world. Instead, the world begins to move through you. Every sound, every breeze, every ripple of emotion passes gently across the surface of awareness, like wind brushing over still water. And in that vast stillness, you begin to notice something extraordinary. There is no boundary between you and it. There never was. The Silent One's lamp, the one he left by the riverbank, continued to glow softly through the ages. Rain came, winds came, the river swelled and shrank, yet the flame, somehow, never went out. Villagers told their children, this light has no fuel, no wick, no oil. It burns on silence itself. And in time, the story became a myth, and the myth became a song mothers hummed to their children on nights when the moon refused to rise. It was said that if you followed that river far enough, beyond the forests and the stone ridges, you would find its true source a place where dreams dissolve and eternity flows like water. They called it the river beyond dreams. Many lifetimes after the Silent One had departed, a young seeker named Anaya heard the story and could not forget it. She was a wanderer, born in a world of ceaseless noise of voices, preaching truth, yet knowing none. Her heart was restless, her mind sharp as a blade, but her spirit tired. One night, unable to sleep, she whispered to the wind, "If there is a river beyond dreams, show me the way." The wind replied not in words, but in a soft rustle of leaves that sounded almost like a heartbeat. That night, she began her journey. For 7 days, she walked through dust and thunder. For 7 nights, she crossed valleys where even the stars seemed to sleep. On the 8th night, she reached the edge of a vast plain. There, under a twilight sky, she saw a faint glimmer on the horizon, a silver thread winding through the earth. It was the river, silent, endless, moving like liquid glass beneath the breath of the universe. As she approached, the air around her grew lighter, not in temperature, but in essence. It was as though gravity itself was softening. Her thoughts slowed. Her heartbeat faded into rhythm with the current. She knelt by the water's edge and whispered, "Are you real?" The river answered, but not with sound. It spoke directly to her being, a vibration, felt rather than heard. "I am what flows when the dreamer awakens." Anaya trembled. She reached out, letting her fingers touch the surface. The moment her skin met the water, memories began to shimmer and break apart childhood faces, long-forgotten fears, laughter, tears, regrets, all dissolving into ripples of light. She tried to pull back, but the river whispered again, Do not fear the dissolving. You are not what fades. You are what remains. Time seemed to vanish. She didn't know whether moments or centuries passed. Her body grew lighter, as though she were being drawn inward, not into death, but into vastness. And then she saw them, thousands of tiny flames floating along the water, each one drifting, merging, separating, like souls returning to a single light. In that instant, she realized every flame was a heart that had awakened. Every light was a being who had once carried pain and then released it. The river was not made of water. It was made of consciousness, pure awareness flowing through eternity. She closed her eyes, and her breath became the river's song. A voice rose from the current, gentle, ancient, and infinite. Every life is a wave. Every death is the wave returning, but the ocean never dies. You have been stone and seed, flame and wind, child and sage, lover and wanderer. All of them were costumes worn by the same light. And now you remember. Anaya opened her eyes. The world around her shimmered like a reflection, real and unreal at once. She saw cities made of sound, forests woven from thought, skies painted by the rhythm of breathing stars. Everything was connected, a single, endless pulse. She realized there was no river. There was only flow. There was no dream. There was only awareness dreaming itself into forms. And in that moment of recognition, she laughed softly, freely. Her laughter echoed across realms, and where it fell, flowers of light bloomed. A figure appeared before her, neither man nor woman, neither young nor old. It was the silent one, the keeper of the flame. He looked at her and said, "Welcome home, Anaya." She bowed deeply. "Is this the end?" she asked. He smiled, his eyes like the reflection of 1,000 dawns. "There is no end. There is only deeper remembering." He gestured toward the horizon, where the river melted into a sea of radiant mist. "What you see now is not another world. It is the same world finally seen without forgetting. Return, if you wish. Walk among them. Carry the stillness as your speech and the light as your heart. When they see you, they will not understand what has changed, but they will feel peace, because peace is what you are." As dawn approached, Anaya found herself standing once again by the same riverbank where she had first knelt. But everything was different, not in form, but in perception. The trees breathed, the sky hummed, the ground pulsed with quiet joy. She looked into the river's surface and saw not her reflection, but the reflection of all beings. Each face shimmered within the current, some laughing, some weeping, some still searching, some nearly home. And she understood. To awaken is not to escape the dream. It is to become the dream's awareness. That night, she built a small lamp from a hollowed stone and river reeds. She lit it with the flame of her own breath and placed it beside the water right where the Silent One's lamp had once stood. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying her voice into the distance. May every soul who wanders here remember the river beyond dreams, not as a place to reach, but as the truth they already are. And somewhere, deep within the night, a ripple began, soft, endless, radiant, as if the universe itself had just exhaled in peace. The river flowed on, and the dream continued, but now it was awake. Morning came quietly. The sky was painted in soft shades of gold and rose, and a cool mist drifted above the river. Anaya opened her eyes, feeling the earth breathing gently beneath her. The river was still there, flowing endlessly as before. But it was no longer just a river to her. It was a mirror of truth, a voice of silence, a reminder of what she had seen, that everything, even this world, was made of the same light. She sat for a long time, listening to the song of water and wind. Each sound was alive. Each moment was complete. There was nothing to chase anymore, nothing to resist. Just the soft rhythm of existence, like the universe breathing through her. When she finally stood up, her feet felt light, as though she were walking not on the ground, but with it. Each step seemed to awaken something gentle in the earth. The grass beneath her toes sparkled with dew. The morning birds began their calls, and even their songs seemed different, like messages of joy whispered by the unseen. Anaya began to walk back toward the world she had left behind, not as a seeker now, but as one who had found what could never be lost. For many days, she walked through villages and valleys. People saw her passing by a simple woman in white robes, barefoot, carrying no belongings, her face calm and bright like sunrise after rain. Children followed her out of curiosity. Elders bowed their heads without knowing why. Even the animals seemed unafraid. Anaya never spoke much. When someone asked her where she came from, she simply smiled and said, "From silence." When they asked where she was going, she would look at the horizon and whisper, "Wherever the light leads." One evening, she reached a small village at the foot of a mountain. The people there were kind but weary. They worked hard in the fields, faced drought and sickness, and carried the heavy weight of survival. Anaya sat under a banyan tree near the edge of the village. She closed her eyes and began to breathe slowly. There was no intention, no effort, only peace flowing outward like invisible waves. By nightfall, a few villagers had gathered around her. They didn't know what they expected, but they felt drawn to her stillness. A child asked softly, "Who are you?" Anaya opened her eyes and said, "I am what you are when you stop trying to become." The people looked at each other, puzzled, but the child smiled. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the calm that surrounded her, and somehow that was enough. Days passed, and people began to visit her daily. Some came with questions about life and pain. Others brought food and water just to sit beside her quietly. She never gave long sermons. Sometimes she spoke just a few sentences, but her words carried weight, as if they came not from the mind, but from the heart of existence itself. One man said, "My wife is ill. I have prayed and prayed, but nothing changes." Anaya placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "The prayer you repeat is filled with fear. The prayer that heals is made of peace. Do not ask life to change. Ask your heart to open." The man went home silently, and though his wife's sickness remained for a time, something changed inside him. He became gentle, he became patient, and slowly his wife began to recover. An old woman came one afternoon and said, "My son went away to find work. I have not heard from him for many months. I can't stop worrying." Anaya smiled softly. "Every mother's heart is like the sky," she said. "Sometimes clouds cover it, but the sun you love is still there. Worry hides love. Let your love breathe, and your son will feel it wherever he is." The woman wept. She left lighter than she came. Weeks later, her son returned, thin, tired, but safe. He said, "Mother, one night I felt your peace. It guided me home." As months passed, Anaya's presence became a quiet blessing. The village grew calmer. People stopped arguing over small things. Neighbors began sharing their food again. Even the children stopped fighting and played under the banyan tree where she often sat. It was as if her silence had washed over everything. No one could explain it, but they all felt it. One day, a young monk from a faraway monastery came to see her. He had heard rumors of a woman who shines without light. He bowed deeply and said, "Master, please teach me how to find what you have found." Anaya looked at him with kindness and replied, "You already have it. The treasure you seek is buried beneath your wanting. Be still long enough, and you will see it glowing inside you." The monk frowned. "But how can I stop wanting?" She smiled. "When you see that wanting itself brings pain, you will stop out of love, not discipline." He was silent for a long time, and then tears filled his eyes. He bowed again, and for the first time in his life, he felt peace. Seasons changed. The rains came and went. The trees shed their leaves, then bloomed again. Anaya stayed, teaching without teaching, speaking without words. Sometimes she walked alone in the fields at dawn, watching the mist lift over the crops. Sometimes she sat by the river, the same river that had once shown her the truth beyond dreams. She knew now that there was no difference between the sacred and the ordinary. Every breath was meditation, every smile was prayer, every act of kindness was enlightenment in motion. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, a group of villagers gathered around her. They asked, "Master, what is peace? Can you describe it to us?" Anaya looked at them and said slowly, "Peace is not something you find. It is something you stop losing. It was with you when you were a child, when you looked at the sky without fear. It is with you now, when you breathe without reason. Peace is not in a temple or a book. It lives quietly in your own chest. You only need to stop running from it." The villagers sat silently, and for a long time no one spoke. But everyone felt it, a deep, wordless understanding. That night, as stars filled the sky, Anaya sat by the river again. She lit her small stone lamp, the same one she had made long ago, and placed it gently upon the water. The flame floated, reflecting on the calm surface. It was small, yet it glowed like a piece of eternity. She whispered to the night, "May this light reach all hearts, even those who have forgotten what they are." The river carried the flame onward, and as it drifted into the darkness, the stars above seemed to shimmer brighter, as if bowing in silent gratitude. And so, the woman who had found the river beyond dreams became a river herself, flowing quietly through the hearts of all who met her. Her words turned into seeds of peace. Her silence became a temple. Her presence a reminder that the divine is not somewhere far away. It is the quiet within us, always waiting to be remembered. Years drifted by like clouds moving across a vast blue sky. The village that had once been heavy with worry was now filled with quiet laughter and easy kindness. People worked together, shared their food, and began their days by bowing to the rising sun. The banyan tree under which Anaya sat had grown thick and wide, its roots like ancient arms embracing the earth. Children played in its shade. Old men sat there to rest their bones. Women gathered to weave, singing softly as they worked. And through all of it, Anaya remained a calm flame at the center of their simple world. Her hair had turned white as river foam, but her eyes still carried the same light, the same wordless peace that could melt even the hardest sorrow. One night, as the moon shone high, a young shepherd from a distant village dreamed of her. He had never met Anaya, never even heard her name, yet in his dream she stood beside him on a field of stars. She said nothing, only smiled a smile that dissolved every fear inside him. When he awoke, his heart was trembling, but not with fear, with recognition. He felt as though something ancient within him had remembered its way home. The next morning, without knowing why, he forgave a neighbor he had hated for years. He shared his bread with a stranger. He looked at the world differently, not as a battlefield, but as a garden waiting to be cared for. And far away, beneath her banyan tree, Anaya smiled in her meditation. Somewhere deep inside her, she felt a breeze, the kind that tells the heart. A seed has opened. Over time, others began to dream of her too. Farmers, travelers, merchants, monks. They all saw the same gentle figure, a woman standing beside a river, her lamp floating across the surface, her eyes filled with calm that seemed older than the sky. Some of them told no one, afraid their friends would laugh. But the dream changed them. It softened something inside. They began to listen more, speak less, and see the sacred in the small things, the sound of rain, the warmth of tea, the kindness of a stranger. Others began to travel, searching for the woman of light. They came to the village, and when they found Anaya, they would bow in silence, not because she demanded it, but because their hearts told them to. She greeted each visitor with a smile, never claiming to be anyone special. "Sit," she would say softly. "Let the earth breathe through you." And so they sat, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, until tears came, until words were no longer needed. When they finally left, they carried her silence with them, like a secret flame that would never go out. As the years rolled on, those who had sat with her began to teach others. They didn't build temples or write scriptures. They simply lived with quiet awareness. One farmer started leaving a portion of his harvest by the roadside for hungry travelers. A merchant stopped cheating his customers and found joy in honesty. A mother began teaching her children how to breathe calmly when angry instead of shouting. They never said, "This is Anaya's teaching." They just lived it. And the village began to glow not with gold or grandeur, but with the soft light of human goodness. This light spread slowly, like dawn across the valleys. Villages miles away started to change too. No one could explain it. But people said, "There is a peace moving through the land like wind you cannot see, but you can feel." Those who carried her silence in their hearts were called the Silent Ones. They had no robes, no titles, no followers. Yet wherever they went, the air seemed lighter. The world felt kinder. One day, a caravan of scholars and monks arrived from a far kingdom. They had heard of the silent woman whose stillness healed broken hearts. Their leader, an old monk named Jinwu, approached Anaya with great reverence. He said, "Master, we have studied scriptures all our lives. We have debated philosophy, recited mantras, and yet peace escapes us. Please teach us what you know." Anaya looked at them kindly and said, "What you seek is not in your scrolls or your voices. It is in the silence between them." The monks exchanged glances. One of them said, "But we meditate for hours every day." Anaya nodded. "Then perhaps it is not meditation you need to learn," she said softly, "but how to stop trying so hard to meditate." Jinwu's eyes widened. He bowed deeply. "Your words are simple," he whispered, but they break through walls of thought like thunder. Anaya smiled. Thunder does not break the sky, she said. It only reminds the clouds to let go. For many days, the monks stayed in the village, not to learn new lessons, but to unlearn old ones. They worked in the fields, shared food with the poor, and listened to the wind. When they left, they were changed. Their faces were lighter, their laughter genuine. And when they reached their monastery again, they didn't build more altars, they planted trees. Anaya grew older, but her peace only deepened. Sometimes she would sit by the river for hours, her reflection merging with the water as if she had become part of it. People noticed something strange. Birds would gather around her, resting near her feet without fear. Even wild animals came close, drawn by an invisible calm. At night, travelers passing through the valley would see a faint light glowing near the banyan tree, like a single star resting on earth. They would whisper, "It must be her spirit keeping watch." And indeed, her presence was not limited by her body anymore. It moved freely through the dreams of the suffering, through the silence of seekers, through the soft laughter of children. Her peace had become part of the wind. One twilight, as the sky turned gold, Anaya gathered her students for the last time. They sensed something, a quiet farewell in her voice. She said, "My dear ones, you have all looked for truth outside yourselves, but truth is not found, it is remembered. When I am gone, do not cling to my words, cling to your breath, for it is the same breath that moves through stars." Tears filled their eyes. "Master," one asked softly, "how will we know you are still with us?" Anaya smiled. "When you sit in silence and your heart feels vast as the sky, that is me. When you forgive before being asked, that is me. When you look at another and see no separation, that is me." She closed her eyes, and the air around her shimmered. The birds grew still, the river slowed, the wind held its breath. Then only silence. But it was not the silence of loss, it was the silence of truth fulfilled. And from that silence, the world bloomed again. Her students continued to live as she had, teaching without words, healing without effort. The peace that had begun in one heart had now become a river of light flowing through countless souls. No temple was built for Anaya, because the true temple was everywhere in the sound of wind, in the laughter of children, in the stillness between two heartbeats. And in every dawn, when the first light touched the river, it shimmered, as if bowing in remembrance of the one who had shown the world how the silent ones speak. As the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky with shades of orange and violet, Master Kosen and his students gathered by the quiet pond near the rebuilt monastery. The air was still, and the only sound was the soft ripple of water caused by the evening breeze. The students sat in silence, their reflections shimmering on the surface of the pond. After a while, Kosen spoke gently, his voice blending with the calmness of the moment. "Tell me," he asked, "what do you see when you look into the water?" One student replied, "I see myself, Master, my face, my eyes, my robes." Another said, "I see the mountains behind us and the sky above." A third added, "I see the ripples that make the reflection unclear." Kosen nodded and smiled softly. "Yes," he said, "and that is how the mind works too. The pond is like your consciousness. When it is calm, it reflects truth clearly, but when stirred by thoughts, emotions, or desires, the reflection becomes distorted. The students listened carefully. Kosen picked up a small pebble and dropped it into the pond. Tiny ripples spread out, bending the reflection of the moon that had begun to appear in the evening sky. "Do you see?" he continued. "When the surface is disturbed, even the moon appears broken. But the moon itself is never broken. It remains whole and shining, untouched by what happens on the water." He looked at each of his students. "In the same way, your true self, your inner peace, your awareness is never truly harmed by life's disturbances. What gets disturbed is only the surface of the mind. The deeper truth remains still and pure." One of the younger monks, who often struggled with anger and frustration, asked quietly, "But Master, how can we stop the ripples? How can we keep our minds calm all the time?" Kozen chuckled softly. "You cannot stop the wind, can you? But you can learn to let it pass. The key is not to fight the ripples, but to stop identifying with them. When anger comes, see it as a wave. When fear arises, see it as another ripple. Do not dive into the water trying to fix it. Simply watch it until it fades." The monk thought for a while and then asked, "But what if the water never settles?" Kozen smiled gently. "Then keep watching. Even the strongest wind must eventually rest. The more you practice watching without reacting, the faster the water clears." He stood up slowly and gestured toward the mountains. "The world outside will always change. Storms will come and go. But within you lies a still lake that nothing can disturb. When you learn to rest in that stillness, you will find peace even in the middle of chaos." The students sat quietly, letting his words sink in. The wind had died down, and the pond now reflected the moon perfectly calm, whole and shining. Kosen said softly, almost in a whisper, "This is your mind when you stop chasing thoughts. It becomes a mirror that reflects truth just as it is. Not what you wish it to be, not what you fear it might be, but what it truly is." As night deepened, the monks remained by the pond in silent meditation. The stars began to appear one by one, reflected in the still water. Each student could now feel the meaning of Kozen's words. Peace was not something to be found. It was something to be remembered. And in that moment, under the vast sky, they understood. The mirror of the mind does not need polishing. It only needs to be still. The next morning, the monastery was quiet, except for the sound of soft footsteps moving through the courtyard. The sky was pale with the first light of dawn, and a cool mist drifted between the pine trees. The monks gathered in the meditation hall, sitting in neat rows on their cushions. A candle flickered at the front of the room, its flame steady and calm. Master Kosen entered silently and sat before them. For a few moments, no one spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic breathing of the monks. Then Kosen opened his eyes and said softly, "Today we will learn the breath of stillness, a way to return home to the quiet within you, no matter what happens outside." He looked around the room, his eyes kind but deep. "Many of you," he continued, "have learned to watch your thoughts, to observe your emotions like clouds passing in the sky. But when pain comes, when the body aches, or the heart feels broken, the mind often forgets everything and runs in panic. It resists, it fights, it says, 'This should not be happening,' and that resistance is what keeps the pain alive." The monks listened closely. Some nodded, others sat completely still, absorbing each word. Kosen continued, "The breath of stillness is not about escaping pain. It is about resting so deeply in the present moment that even pain loses its power. you breathe with awareness, you are no longer just a person experiencing suffering. You become the witness, the space in which all things rise and fall. He demonstrated by placing his hand gently on his chest. "Close your eyes," he said. "Feel your breath. Don't change it. Just notice it. The breath moves in, the breath moves out. Between the breaths, there is a tiny pause, a gap so small you can almost miss it. That pause is stillness. That pause is peace." The hall grew silent. Even the candle flame seemed to listen. "Now," Kozen said, "when pain comes, bring your awareness to your breath. Feel it flow through the place that hurts, whether it is your body or your heart. Do not say, 'I want it to stop.' Instead, whisper inside yourself, 'This too belongs,' and breathe." He paused and smiled softly. "At first, you may feel the pain even more sharply, but if you stay, if you breathe through it with kindness and curiosity, something mysterious begins to happen. The pain stops being an enemy. It becomes a messenger. It starts to speak to you." Aha. A monk raised his hand quietly. "Master," he said, "what does the pain say?" Kozen's eyes shone like the morning sun touching the mist. "It says, 'I am not here to hurt you. I am here to wake you.' Every ache, every sorrow, every wound is a teacher in disguise. But you can only hear its teaching when you stop fighting it." He closed his eyes again and continued speaking slowly. "Breathe in. Feel the air touch your lungs. Breathe out. Let go of all control. With each breath, remind yourself, 'I am safe in this moment. I am not the pain. I am the space in which it appears.'" Minutes passed in deep silence. The monks felt their bodies relax, their hearts open. Some felt tears on their cheeks, not from sadness, but from a quiet sense of release. When Kozen finally opened his eyes, he said, "This is the breath of stillness. It does not remove pain, but it transforms your relationship with it. You stop being the one who suffers, and you become the one who understands. That is the beginning of true healing." He stood up slowly and looked out the window at the sunlight breaking through the mist. When the storm passes, the mountain does not complain about the rain. It simply stands, patient and strong. Be like the mountain. Let your breath be your ground, and let your stillness be your strength. The monks bowed deeply, and the sound of their movement echoed softly through the hall. The lesson of that morning would stay with them forever, not as words in their minds, but as peace in their breath. And as the day began, they carried that stillness into every moment, chopping wood, sweeping floors, cooking rice, each breath a reminder that even in pain, peace was never lost. Days passed peacefully in the monastery after Master Kozen taught the breath of stillness. The monks practiced it daily during meditation, while sweeping the courtyards, and even as they worked in the gardens. They began to notice small changes within themselves. Their minds felt quieter, their hearts lighter. But still, there was one emotion that continued to trouble many of them: fear. Fear came in many forms. Some monks feared illness or death. Others feared failing in their spiritual practice. A few feared losing the calm they had worked so hard to achieve. One evening, as the orange sun dipped behind the mountains, a young monk named Riku approached Master Kozen. His hands trembled slightly as he bowed and said, "Master, I try to meditate every day. I breathe as you taught us. I try to let go of pain. But still, fear keeps returning. I am afraid of losing everything. My peace, my home, my life. How do I stop being afraid?" Kozen looked at him for a moment. then gestured for Riku to follow. They walked quietly up a narrow path that wound around the mountain. The air was cool and smelled of pine and wet earth. Soon they reached a cliff that overlooked the valley below. The wind whistled softly through the trees. Kosen pointed to the edge of the cliff and said, "Step closer." Riku hesitated. "Master, if I go closer, I might fall." Kosen nodded gently. "Yes, that is fear the mind's voice saying, if I go too far, I might lose control. But come closer anyway, just one step." Riku's heart pounded. His mind screamed for safety, yet he trusted his teacher. Slowly, he stepped forward until his toes were almost at the edge. His breath grew shallow. His legs shook. Kosen said softly, "Now, feel your fear. Don't run from it. Don't fight it. Just breathe." Riku closed his eyes and took a deep breath. For a moment, he imagined himself falling wind rushing past his face, nothing to hold on to. But then something changed. Beneath the trembling and the panic, he felt something else space. A strange stillness beneath the fear, as if the fear itself was floating inside a larger calm. Kosen watched him quietly, then said, "Fear is not the enemy, Riku. Fear is simply the body's way of saying, 'Wake up, you are alive.'" He continued, "When you try to fight fear, it grows. But when you look directly into it, it begins to dissolve like mist when the morning sun touches it. Fear cannot survive awareness." Riku opened his eyes, still standing at the edge. "But Master," he said, "what if my fear never goes away?" Kosen smiled. "Then you bow to it. You make it your teacher. You say, 'Fear, thank you for reminding me that I am not in control of life, and I don't need to be.'" He sat down on a rock nearby, looking out over the endless valley. "Surrender," he said softly, "does not mean giving up. It means letting go of the illusion that you can control everything. It means trusting life, even when it feels uncertain." The master picked up a small leaf that had fallen nearby. He held it up to the wind and said, "This leaf doesn't know where it will land. The wind may carry it to the river, or it may fall at my feet, but it does not resist. It trusts the wind. Can you do the same?" Riku watched the leaf float away into the valley below, turning, gliding, and finally disappearing into the mist. Something inside him softened. He realized that all his fear came from trying to hold on to what could never be held life itself. Kosen continued, "The secret, my dear student, is this. Fear ends where trust begins. Not trust in fate, not trust in luck, but trust in the simple truth that whatever happens, you will still be part of this great mystery called existence. Nothing is ever truly lost." The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of pine and smoke from the monastery below. Kosen closed his eyes and said, "When fear visits again, and it will, don't push it away. Sit with it. Offer it tea. Listen to its message. Then thank it, bow to it, and breathe it out. That is surrender." Riku bowed deeply, tears welling in his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't trying to push fear away, he was simply letting it exist, without resistance. And in that simple act, fear began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength he had never felt before. As they walked back down the path, the sun had vanished, leaving behind streaks of violet and gold in the sky. The world felt vast, mysterious, and yet perfectly safe. That night, as the monks chanted in the dim light of the meditation hall, Riku sat silently, breathing slowly. The same fear that once felt like fire now felt like a cool wind moving through him, alive, but harmless. He finally understood. Surrender is not weakness. It is the deepest kind of courage, the courage to trust life completely. The days at the monastery flowed like the river that wound through the valley, quiet, unhurried, and full of hidden life. After the teaching on fear and surrender, the monks practiced meeting every emotion with awareness. Yet one question remained in many hearts. How do we let go completely? Even after fear faded, attachment lingered to comfort, to memories, to expectations. Letting go sounded beautiful in words, but in practice, it felt like trying to open a clenched fist that had forgotten how to relax. One cool morning, the mountain air was wrapped in fog. The monastery bells echoed softly through the mist, calling the monks to the courtyard. There, Master Kosen stood near a small fig tree. He held a worn clay cup in his hand, simple, cracked, and faded from years of use. When everyone had gathered, he said, "This cup has served me for many years. It has held water, tea, and even flowers. But every morning, when I pour tea into it, I remind myself this cup is already broken." The monks looked puzzled. The cup seemed perfectly fine. Kosen smiled gently and continued, "To me, it is already gone. One day it will slip from my hand and shatter, or it will fade and crumble with time. But because I know this, I can use it fully, love it deeply, and never fear its end." He paused and let his words sink into the silence. "To let go is not to stop caring," he said softly. "It is to care so fully that you no longer need to cling." A young monk named Tenzin spoke up. "Master, how can we live this way? If we accept that everything will one day be gone, won't that make life feel empty?" Kosen turned toward him with a kind smile. "Ah, Tenzin, that is the great misunderstanding. When you let go, life does not become empty, it becomes full. When you stop trying to hold on to everything, your hands are finally free to touch what is here, now." He lifted the clay cup, admiring how the morning light touched its surface. "If I cling to this cup, I cannot see its beauty. My fear of losing it hides its perfection. But when I release the need for it to last forever, I see it clearly, and I am grateful. That is true love without possession." The monks stood silently, listening to the distant call of mountain birds. The fog began to lift, revealing the gentle outlines of pine trees and stone paths. Kosen continued, "We think letting go means losing something, but in truth, it means returning what was never ours to keep. We borrow everything, our bodies, our thoughts, even the people we love. Everything is a guest, passing through our lives for a time. The wise do not close the door to keep them. They bow in gratitude when they leave." He began to walk slowly toward the monastery steps. "Imagine a stream," he said. "You cannot hold the water in your hands. The more tightly you try, the faster it slips away. But if you relax, the water flows over your palms, cool and alive. This is how life must be lived." One of the elder monks, who had been silent for most of the morning, said quietly, "Master, sometimes I fear that if I let go too much, I will stop caring. I will stop trying to improve myself, stop trying to serve others." Kosen nodded, understanding the heart behind the words. "Letting go is not about indifference," he said gently. "It is about trust. When you let go of control, love begins to flow naturally, without effort. You serve not because you must, but because your heart cannot help it. The flower does not plan to bloom. It just blooms." He stopped near the fig tree again and placed the clay cup on the ground. Letting go he said, is the art of returning to flow. It is not the end of care, it is the beginning of peace. The monks bowed, their eyes glistening with quiet understanding. They could feel the truth of the teaching, not as an idea, but as a living thing, something breathing in the wind around them. Later that evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, the monks gathered by the river. They began a simple ritual that Kozen had taught them, a practice of release. Each monk held a dry leaf in his hand, whispering into it something he was ready to let go of: fear, pride, longing, or pain. Then one by one, they placed the leaves upon the flowing water and watched them drift away. The sight was mesmerizing. Dozens of small leaves floated down the silver-blue river, carrying with them invisible burdens. The sound of water over stones blended with the hum of evening crickets, creating a gentle song of surrender. Kozen stood at a distance, watching his students with deep compassion. He knew that letting go was not a single act, it was a lifelong practice. Each day, a little more loosened, each breath, a little more released. As darkness settled over the valley, he whispered to himself, "Everything that comes must go. Everything that goes makes space for something new." That is the rhythm of existence, the dance of life and death, of holding and releasing. And in that quiet hour, the monastery seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the earth, steady, open, alive. That night, when the monks lay down to rest, they did so with lighter hearts. The sound of the river outside their windows reminded them, nothing lasts forever, and that is why everything is precious. As the final night settled over the monastery, the air was soft and cool. The mountain was wrapped in silver mist, and the sound of the river murmured like a lullaby beneath the stars. The monks had long gone to rest, their breath rising and falling in rhythm with the gentle pulse of the world. Only Master Kozen remained awake, sitting beneath the old fig tree. A candle burned beside him, its flame steady and calm. He watched it quietly, the way one might watch their own thoughts appearing, dancing and fading away. He had lived many seasons on this mountain. He had known gain and loss, joy and sorrow, love and parting. But now, all of it felt like waves that had finally reached shore and dissolved back into the sea. The truth he had spent his life seeking was not hidden in scrolls or words. It was here in the silence between breaths, in the warmth of light on his face, in the stillness of simply being. He closed his eyes and smiled. "Peace," he whispered, "is not something we find. It is what remains when we stop searching." Above him, the wind moved gently through the trees. The candle flickered, then went out not in sadness, but in perfect ease. Darkness filled the space where the light had been, but the darkness was not empty. It was vast, tender, alive. Far below, the monks slept soundly, their dreams light and clear. In the distance, the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, pale gold, brushing against deep indigo. A new day was already being born. And though Master Kozen's candle had gone out, its warmth remained not in wax or flame, but in the hearts of those he had guided. They would wake tomorrow and carry his teachings in the way they walked, the way they spoke, the way they breathed. Not as words to remember, but as a way of seeing the world gently, deeply, and without fear. For this was the true gift of Zen, not escape, but awakening. Not leaving the world behind, but meeting it fully, moment by moment, without clinging or resistance. And so, as the sun slowly rose over the mountains, its light spilling across the silent temple, the great truth revealed itself once more. Nothing to hold, nothing to fear, nothing missing, nothing wrong. Just this breath, just this life, just this infinite peace. Welcome home. If this story touched your heart, take a deep breath. Let it settle within you. Subscribe to Unik Monk for more journeys into calm and wisdom. Turn on the bell to stay connected. And remember, whenever the world feels heavy, you can always return here, to stillness, to yourself. Tab 2. Tonight, we begin a quiet journey together. A journey that will carry you deep into rest and plant gentle seeds of peace within the garden of your mind. There is nothing you need to achieve here. No effort, no discipline, no goal. These are not lessons to be memorized, but soft reminders of truths you have always known, truths that live quietly within you, waiting to be remembered. Before we begin, take a slow breath. Notice where you are. Perhaps whisper to yourself what time it is or where in the world you are listening from. Because even though distance may separate us, this silence connects us always and everywhere. The wisdom of Zen teaches that peace is not something we must build. It is something we must reveal, like a mountain lake that becomes cloudy only when disturbed. When the water settles, clarity returns on its own. So it is with the mind. When we struggle, when we grasp, when we chase, we stir the waters. But when we rest, when we let the ripples fade, the reflection returns clear, vast, still. As we walk together through these ancient teachings, you may notice your breath deepening on its own, your body softening, your thoughts slowing. This is not something you must force. It is the natural response of a mind remembering its own stillness. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do. Simply breathe with me and allow yourself to arrive. In a remote valley surrounded by misty peaks, there once stood a monastery known only to a few. And within its quiet walls lived a master named Ryanen, a man known across the mountains for his wisdom, serenity, and his unmatched library of sacred texts. For more than 40 years, Ryanen devoted his life to collecting the rarest sutras, poems, and philosophical scrolls in existence. Pilgrims would cross rivers and deserts just to read in his hall, a sanctuary of words and silence. The library itself was a temple within a temple. Shelves carved from ancient cedar stretched toward the rafters. Every scroll was wrapped in silk, tied with care, and placed precisely where light could not fade its ink. The air smelled of wood, wax, and time. When dawn touched the mountains, soft gold would spill through the paper windows, casting light upon centuries of thought and devotion. Ryanen would rise before the first bell of the monastery. He would light a single candle, sit cross-legged among the shelves, and read in silence while the world outside still slept. Those hours between night and morning were his truest prayer. But one autumn night, as the moon hung pale above the valley, a wind came down from the northern pass, fierce, unrelenting. Within minutes, flames had caught the edges of the monastery roof. The fire spread with terrifying speed, leaping from beam to beam, turning centuries of devotion into burning light. The monks awoke to chaos bells clanging, voices shouting through the smoke. They fled into the courtyard, the air thick with sparks and ash. There was no time to save the books, no way to protect the library. The fire consumed it all. Scrolls written by hand centuries ago, texts carried across continents gone in a single night. 40 years of care, 4 decades of sacred gathering turned to ash before dawn. If this journey brought you peace, remember to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a moment of stillness. Stay till the end and let the calm unfold. When the morning came, the monks gathered among the ruins, trembling, silent. Their faces were streaked with soot and tears. They turned to their teacher, expecting despair, expecting him to collapse beneath the weight of such loss. But Master Ryanen sat upon a stone, hands resting lightly on his knees, watching the smoke rise into the pale morning sky. His face was calm, as if the fire had burned through him as well, leaving only stillness behind. One young monk, unable to contain his sorrow, stepped forward. "Master," he said, his voice shaking, "how can you be so at peace? Everything is gone, all your books, your life's work, the wisdom of generations. How can you sit there as if nothing happened?" Ryanen turned his gaze toward the blackened earth where his beloved library once stood. A faint smile touched his lips. "My child," he said softly, "the teachings were never in the books. They were in the silence that read them." He lifted a handful of ash from the ground, let it fall through his fingers, and whispered, "The fire has taken nothing that was truly mine." The monks wept, not from grief, but from the strange, luminous peace that surrounded their teacher. And as the morning sun rose over the mountain, the ashes shimmered like snow in its light. That day, Ryanen gathered his students and led them to rebuild not the library, but the garden. He said, "Let the wind be our scripture. Let the sound of the river be our sutra. The true text is written everywhere, on water, on air, on the silence between 2 breaths." And in that moment, each monk understood something deeper than words could teach. That sometimes the universe burns away what we cling to so that we may remember what cannot be lost. The gift of loss, how destruction becomes awakening. When the flames of Ryanen's library faded into memory, a new silence settled over the mountain. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of transformation, like the quiet that follows a great storm when the air is clean and the sky impossibly wide. For days, the monks moved through the ruins with care. They gathered pieces of scorched wood, swept the ash into the earth, and bowed before what remained. Every motion was an act of reverence, a prayer offered not for what had been lost, but for what was being revealed. The fire had not only burned the books, it had burned the illusion of permanence. It had stripped away everything unnecessary, leaving behind only what was real. Master Ryanen walked among his students, his robes streaked with soot, his steps unhurried. To those who wept for the lost words, he said, "The fire was a teacher. It came not to destroy, but to show us what cannot be burned." He looked toward the horizon, where smoke still rose faintly against the morning sun, and added, "All that vanishes was never truly ours, only that which watches the vanishing that is eternal." The monks did not understand at first. Their minds were still clinging to what was gone, to the scrolls, the ink, the scent of old cedar. They could not yet see that the true scripture was unfolding in their own hearts. But over time, they began to feel it, a strange lightness where grief had been, something soft, wordless, and infinite. There is a truth hidden in every loss, but it can only be seen when the eyes of resistance close. When we stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and begin to whisper, "What is this showing me?" Loss, when held gently, becomes a kind of grace. It pulls away what we cling to, revealing what was always waiting underneath. Imagine a tree in autumn. Each leaf that falls seems like a small death. But the tree does not resist. It does not mourn what the wind takes away. It knows the falling is necessary, that the emptiness will prepare it for another season of growth. So too with us. When the fires of life sweep through, when what we love turns to ash, we can either reach into the smoke, trying desperately to reclaim what's gone, or we can bow before the lesson that is arriving. Ryonen once told his students, "Attachment is like holding onto a rope that burns your hands. You think you are saving yourself, but the tighter you grip, the deeper the pain." He would then smile gently and add, "When you finally let go, you do not fall, you float." As the seasons passed, the monastery was rebuilt, but not in the same way. Where once there were endless shelves of paper, now were gardens and open courtyards. Where there had been walls, there was sky. Ryonen said, "Let this place breathe as we must learn to breathe." Each morning, he would gather his students beneath a great oak and speak softly of impermanence, of loss, of the beauty of change. He told them stories not from books, but from the quiet wisdom of observation. He would point to the morning dew and say, "This is the scripture of the dawn." He would listen to the river and whisper, "This is the sound of truth flowing." He would close his eyes, place a hand upon his heart, and say, "This is where the real library has always been." The monks learned that the fire had not taken their teachings. It had freed them from the illusion that wisdom lives on paper. It had shown them that enlightenment cannot be bound to ink or page, because it breathes in every heartbeat and shines in every fleeting moment. One evening, a young monk approached Ryonen as they watched the sunset. He said, "Master, I have been thinking about the fire. I still cannot understand why something so sacred had to be destroyed." Ryonen smiled, his eyes reflecting the orange glow of the sky. "Tell me," he said, "what happens when a candle burns?" The monk hesitated. The wax melts, the flame consumes it, and then the light fades. "Yes," said Ryonen, "but where does the light go?" The student thought for a long while, then shook his head. "I do not know." Ryonen nodded. "Exactly. You cannot point to where it went, because the light was never something that could be lost. It was the expression of the wax, not the wax itself. The light was always free." He turned back toward the horizon. "Our lives, our work, our possessions, they are the wax, the spirit, the awareness, the love that is the flame. When wax is gone, the light returns to the whole." The young monk felt something stir within him, a peace that words could not reach. He realized that the library had not perished. It had simply changed its form. Its wisdom now lived in their breath, their actions, their silence. That night, as the moon rose over the valley, the monks sat together in meditation. The air was cool, filled with the scent of pine and earth. The stars hung like silent witnesses above them, and as they breathed in unison, they felt the truth of their master's teaching, that even in loss, there is nothing missing. That destruction is only a doorway to deeper seeing. The fire had taken away what could be burned, but it had left untouched what was infinite. And that infinite peace, that unshakable stillness became the monastery's new scripture. Loss is not the end of something, it is the unveiling of what endures. When the known dissolves, the real appears quiet, formless, eternal. The next time something in your life falls away, a plan, a dream, a person, a sense of who you thought you were, pause, breathe, watch the smoke rise without judgment, and whisper, "This too is the fire of awakening." Because sometimes the greatest teachers arrive not in the form of wise words, but in the shape of endings. And when we meet those endings with open eyes, they stop being losses. They become liberations. The still point, finding peace in the space between. In every breath, there is a small, forgotten moment, a space between the inhale and the exhale. It is so brief, so subtle, that most never notice it. Yet within that quiet pause, the entire universe rests. It is the still point, the place where time holds its breath and being simply is. Master Ryonen often spoke of this place, though he said it could never be found by searching. "It reveals itself," he would whisper, "when you stop trying to reach it." He once led his students down to the river at dawn. Mist hung low over the water, and the first light of morning touched the ripples like gold dust. He said, "Listen." For a while, the monks heard nothing but the murmur of water and the occasional rustle of leaves. Then Ryonen spoke again. "Do you hear the silence beneath the river's song?" The monks strained their ears. All they could hear was the current, steady and endless. "The silence," said the master, "is not the absence of sound. It is the space that allows sound to be heard. Without it, even the song of the river could not exist." He picked up a smooth stone from the riverbank and held it up. "This stone," he said, "exists because space allows it to. Sound exists because silence holds it. And you, my students, exist because awareness holds you. That awareness, that still point, is your true home." The monks bowed, and in that moment, the world seemed to stand still. The water continued to flow, the wind continued to move, but beneath it all there was something unmoving, a presence vast and timeless, quiet and infinite. That evening, Ryonen sat alone beneath the old oak tree, watching fireflies rise from the grass like floating stars. A young monk approached quietly and asked, "Master, what is this stillness you speak of? Is it found in meditation, or is it something we must earn through discipline?" Ryonen smiled. "The stillness you seek has never been lost," he said. "It is here, between each thought, between each heartbeat, between each moment of wanting and becoming." The monk furrowed his brow. "But how do I reach it?" The master's eyes softened. "By not reaching." He lifted his hand and drew a circle in the air. "Imagine the surface of a lake," he said. "When the wind stirs, the surface ripples. The reflections distort, you see fragments, not the whole. But when the wind ceases, the lake returns to stillness, and the reflection becomes clear." He paused, letting the silence stretch between them. "The ripples are your thoughts. The wind is your effort. The still point is your true reflection, always there, waiting beneath the surface." The monk closed his eyes, listening to the hum of crickets and the soft breath of night. He felt his thoughts swirl, then settle. For a brief moment, there was no inside or outside, no self, no sound, only peace. When he opened his eyes, the master was smiling. "You see," he said softly, "you did not go anywhere. You simply stopped leaving." Days turned to weeks, and the monks continued their practice not of achieving, but of allowing. They learned to bow not only before their teacher, but before each moment as it arrived. The steam rising from a bowl of tea, the sound of rain on the roof, the warmth of sunlight through the paper window, each became a doorway to stillness. Ryonen often reminded them, the mind searches for peace as if it were a place, a destination at the end of effort. But peace is not something you reach, it is what remains when you stop searching. Sometimes he would stand in the garden after a long rain and simply watch the droplets slide from the leaves. When a monk asked what he was doing, he said, "I am listening to stillness move." The monk looked confused. "Master, how can stillness move?" Ryonen smiled faintly. "Just as music moves through silence, just as life moves through death, just as truth moves through everything." There is a story told about that same master, one that the monks would whisper for generations. One evening, a visitor arrived at the monastery, a scholar from the city, renowned for his intellect and his questions. He had heard of Ryanen's wisdom and came seeking answers. The scholar bowed deeply and said, "Master, I have read hundreds of scriptures, studied countless philosophies, yet I cannot find peace. Please teach me the essence of stillness." Ryonen said nothing. He poured tea into the visitor's cup and kept pouring. The cup overflowed, spilling across the table and onto the floor. The scholar jumped back. "Stop! The cup is full." Ryonen looked at him calmly. "Exactly," he said. "How can I show you stillness when your mind is already full of noise?" The scholar's face softened. He bowed once more, and in that bow, the first crack of humility opened a space for stillness to enter. Stillness cannot be forced. It comes when you make room for it. It arrives in the spaces between doing and being, between effort and surrender, between the inhale and the exhale. You do not have to stop thinking to be still. You only need to stop believing every thought that passes by. Each thought is like a wave on the ocean, temporary, beautiful, and incapable of disturbing the depth below. Close your eyes now, if you wish. Listen to your breath. Notice the pause at the top of each inhale and the pause at the bottom of each exhale. That is the still point, the quiet doorway between moments. Step through it gently. Do not chase it. Do not name it. Just allow yourself to rest there, in the silence that holds all things. In the seasons that followed, the monastery changed once more. New monks arrived. Old ones departed. The gardens grew wild, then bloomed again with spring. But through every change, the same stillness remained, a quiet awareness, unmoved by the passing of years. And if you visit that mountain even now, you might find a single monk sitting by the river, watching the water flow, his breath slow and steady. He will not call what he is doing meditation. He will simply call it remembering. For that is what stillness truly is, not an escape from life, but a return to the part of you that has never been carried away. When your mind feels restless, when your thoughts race like the wind, remember this: you are not the ripples. You are the lake. You are not the breath. You are the space that breathes. You are not the movement. You are the still point through which all things move. Rest there, dear one, in that timeless silence where nothing needs to be added and nothing can be taken away. That is peace. That is home. The mirror and the moon, seeing the true self. Beyond illusion, there is an ancient parable told in the monastery that when the moon looks into the lake, it believes itself to be broken. Each ripple shatters its reflection. Each breeze distorts its form until the moon forgets that it has ever been whole. But the truth is simple. The moon was never broken, only the surface through which it was seen. Many years after Ryanan's passing, a young monk named Satori arrived at the monastery gates. He was thin, pale, and carried eyes that looked far older than his age. When the gatekeeper asked what he sought, Satori whispered, "I wish to see my true face." He was taken to the elder who now led the monastery, a quiet woman named Mei Lin, once a disciple of Ryanan. Her hair had turned silver, but her presence carried the same stillness that had once filled her teacher. Satori bowed and said, "Master Mei Lin, I have meditated for years. I have studied the sutras and fasted for clarity, yet my reflection remains cloudy. Who am I, truly?" Mei Lin smiled softly. She pointed to the pond outside her hut. "Go there tonight," she said, "and watch the moon until you find your answer." That night, the air was cool and alive with the scent of cedar. The pond shimmered beneath the silver light of the moon. Satori knelt by the water's edge, his knees pressing into the damp earth. He stared into the pond. The moon stared back whole, luminous, serene. But then a breeze passed, and the reflection trembled. It bent, broke, and reformed in 1,000 fragments of light. Satori frowned. He waited for the image to steady, but every few moments another ripple came, distorting the moon once more. Hours passed. The wind quieted, then rose again. Each time, Satori's heart mirrored the water calm, then disturbed. He began to weep. When Mei Lin came at dawn, she found him still kneeling, his eyes red and tired. He looked up and whispered, "Master, the moon cannot be seen clearly. The water is too restless. I cannot find my true reflection." Mei Lin smiled and knelt beside him. "The moon has not changed," she said. "It is only the pond that forgets how to be still." She touched the surface lightly with her fingertip. "Your mind is this water. Your thoughts are its ripples. When you believe them, you mistake the reflection for the truth." Satori's tears fell into the pond, sending out small, perfect rings of motion. He watched them fade one by one. Then he understood. For days he sat by the pond, doing nothing but watching. At first, the mind resisted. Old memories rose. Questions demanded answers. Desires whispered their familiar songs. But Satori no longer chased them. He let them drift past like leaves in the current. He simply watched the ripples form and fade, watched the wind move through branches, watched his breath soften. And then, one morning, something strange happened. As the sun began to rise, he realized he could no longer tell where his breath ended and the world began. The pond shimmered, the trees swayed, and the sky opened like a deep, endless mirror reflecting itself within itself. He laughed, softly at first, then fully, freely, not because he had found something, but because he had stopped searching. That evening, he returned to Mei Lin. Before he could speak, she said, "You have seen your face?" Satori bowed deeply. "Yes," he said. "It was never mine to see." She nodded. "The mirror does not hold the image, it allows it to appear." She walked with him to the edge of the courtyard, where the first stars began to bloom in the twilight. "The true self," she said, "is like space. It holds everything, but clings to nothing. It is not your body, not your thoughts, not even your awareness of being aware. It is the silence that lets all of this unfold." Satori asked quietly, "Then what am I to do with this knowing?" Mei Lin's smile deepened. "Live, laugh, sweep the floor, share tea with others. Let the knowing vanish in the ordinary. That is where truth breathes." Years passed. Satori remained at the monastery, teaching not with words but through presence. He would often sit with the novices under the old oak tree, the same one that Ryanen had once sat beneath. When asked about enlightenment, he would pick up a fallen leaf, twirl it between his fingers, and ask, "Does this leaf know it has fallen, or is it still part of the wind that carried it here?" The novices would stare, puzzled. He would smile and say nothing more. One day, a child from the nearby village wandered into the monastery. He was lost, frightened, and crying. Satori found him by the gate, kneeling in the dust. The monk lifted the child gently and carried him to the kitchen, where he gave him warm rice and water. When the boy had eaten, he asked, "Sir, are you God?" Satori chuckled. "No," he said. "I'm just someone who stopped pretending not to be." The boy blinked. "I don't understand." "You will," Satori said, "when you grow quiet enough to listen to the silence inside your heartbeat." That night, the child slept peacefully in the temple. Satori watched over him as candlelight flickered across the walls. Outside, the moon rose once more, whole and untouched, reflected perfectly in the still pond. Satori whispered into the night, "The mirror is clear. The moon has never been broken." And for a moment, everything, the stars, the wind, the earth, the breath, felt like one vast breathing silence. Because, in the end, that is the great secret of awakening. You do not dissolve into nothingness. You realize that nothingness has always been everything. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the ocean, momentarily dreaming itself as a drop. And when that dream ends, there is no loss, no death, no separation, only the moon, forever whole, shining upon the still water of your being. The wind that remembers, lessons on letting go. There are things the wind remembers: the scent of summer rain on the fields, the songs whispered by monks through temple corridors, the soft rustle of robes as they sweep the courtyard at dawn. It carries the laughter of children long grown, the sigh of old trees bending in twilight, and the silent prayers of those who seek peace, but do not yet know they already are peace. The wind does not cling to what it carries. It touches everything and moves on. Years after Satori's awakening, he had grown old, his hair now white, his movements slow, but his eyes still clear as the morning sky after rain. The monastery had changed. New halls had been built, the old oak had fallen and sprouted again, and a younger generation had filled the courtyards with the hum of chants and the sound of wooden sandals on stone. One evening, Satori sat with a small group of students beside the incense garden, where the smoke rose in delicate spirals and vanished into the amber glow of dusk. A novice named Anzu asked, "Master, we study detachment every day. We repeat the teachings, we meditate, yet I still feel sorrow when things fade, when a friend leaves, when a flower withers, when the day turns into night. How can I truly let go?" Satori smiled. He picked up a small stick and traced a circle in the sand. "Tell me," he said, "when the circle disappears beneath the wind, where does it go?" Anzu frowned. "It doesn't go anywhere. The wind just moves the sand." "Exactly," said Satori. "Nothing is lost, only rearranged. The form changes, but the essence remains." They sat in silence for a while. The cicadas sang their evening chorus. The first stars began to bloom in the indigo sky. Then Satori continued, "When I was young, I thought letting go meant losing, that to release something was to say goodbye forever. But life has shown me that letting go is simply allowing what wishes to move to move. He lifted his hand and let the breeze pass through his fingers. You see, Anzu, we hold on to moments because we fear emptiness. We believe that without our grip, the world will vanish, that love will end, that joy will leave, that we will be forgotten. But the truth is far kinder. Love is not held, it flows. Like this wind, it touches and keeps moving, carrying traces of everyone it has airbrushed. Anzu looked down at the sand, where the circle had long disappeared. The night had grown deep and quiet. Master, she said softly, when you die, what will happen to you? Satori smiled, not sadly, not proudly, just gently, like a man watching the tide return to the sea. I will become what I have always been, he said, the wind that remembers. That night, a storm rolled through the mountains. Rain lashed the temple roofs, and the monks took shelter by candlelight. But Satori sat by the window of his small hut, watching the lightning dance across the valley. He remembered his teacher, Mei Lin, and her teacher, Ryonen, and all those who had walked this path before him. Each had left behind not monuments, but moments ripples in the still pond of being. And as the rain fell, he whispered to the darkness, I am ready to move as you move, to flow as you flow. When morning came, the storm had passed. The mountains shimmered with mist. The monks found Satori seated by his window, his body still, his face peaceful. On the low table beside him was a note written in brush and ink. Do not build a shrine for me. Sweep the floor, feed the birds, listen to the rain, and when the wind passes your cheek, know that I am still breathing with you. For many years after his passing, the monks noticed something peculiar. Whenever a storm approached, the incense smoke in the temple would shift and circle in perfect spirals, as if carried by invisible hands. They would smile and whisper, Satori is sweeping again. And so, the monastery lived on not as a place of walls and altars, but as a living echo of all who had walked before. Ryonen's fire, Mei Lin's stillness, Satori's laughter, they had not vanished. They had simply changed form, becoming part of the great, remembering wind that moves through everything. Because in truth, nothing ever really ends. The wave returns to the ocean, but the ocean never forgets the shape of the wave. When the monks taught new students, they no longer spoke of enlightenment as something to be reached. They spoke of it as something to be remembered. The Buddha, they would say, is not waiting in the heavens. He is the breath you are taking now. He is the sound of the rain on the roof, the warmth of your tea, the silence between your thoughts. And as the temple bell echoed across the valley, its sound rising and fading like a single breath, the wind would move again through the cedars, soft, ancient, carrying the fragrance of wisdom that never grows old. Because the path of peace is not found in escaping the world, but in embracing it fully, every laugh, every loss, every breath, every letting go. When you cease to clutch at the passing, you realize that nothing truly passes. It all moves in endless rhythm, the same music playing through countless forms. And when you finally rest in that rhythm, when you stop struggling against the dance, you understand what the masters meant all along. You are not in the wind. You are the wind. The sound of one breath, the end of seeking. Dawn arrived quietly that morning. Mist coiled around the monastery's eaves like the memory of dreams not yet gone. The temple bell rang soft, deliberate, each tone rising into mountain air, then fading into silence so complete it almost hummed. For those who listened closely, the silence after the bell felt fuller than the sound itself, a vastness that held the world in its open palms. In that hush, the monks began their morning meditation. The smell of wet cedar drifted through the open doors, and a thin ribbon of incense wound upward, vanishing into the stillness above. No one spoke. No one needed to. The breath of each monk merged with the breath of the others until there was no each. There was only breathing one continuous rhythm of life, expanding and contracting like the tide. Among them sat Anzu, the student who had once asked Satori how to let go. Now she had become the monastery's teacher. Her hair was streaked with silver, but her gaze held the warmth of a sunrise after long rain. As she sat in meditation, she remembered the first time she had met Satori, how restless her heart had been, how desperate she was to grasp peace, as though peace was something fragile she might drop. Now she understood what her master had meant when he spoke of the wind that remembers. Peace was not a possession to be earned. It was the nature of everything. Even the sound of her own breath was not hers. It was the mountain breathing, the trees exhaling through her lungs, the rhythm of existence expressing itself in one gentle motion. She smiled, and in that smile, decades of seeking dissolved like dew beneath the morning sun. Later that day, a young traveler arrived at the monastery gates. He was dusty from the road, his sandals worn thin. He bowed deeply before Anzu. "Teacher," he said, "I have traveled far to find this place. I have read the sutras, studied the teachings, and yet my heart is still troubled. How do I find peace?" Anzu regarded him quietly. She poured tea into 2 cups and handed him one. "Drink," she said. The traveler drank. The tea was warm and slightly bitter. "Do you taste the tea?" Anzu asked. "Yes, teacher." "Then peace is already here." The traveler frowned. "I don't understand." Anzu smiled. "Peace is not hidden. It is what remains when you stop trying to understand." Ko. That night, after the traveler had fallen asleep in the guest hall, Anzu walked to the temple courtyard. The moon was high, its light silvering the stones, and the sound of the river below murmured like a mantra. She closed her eyes and listened, not for words, but for the space between them. For a moment, she thought she heard her master's voice, Satori's soft laughter carried by the breeze. "Nothing is missing, Anzu," it seemed to say. "Even your longing is part of the whole." Years later, Anzu too grew old. When her time came, she gathered the monks beneath the same oak tree where generations before her had sat in silence. She said, "My beloved friends, we have walked this path together, but the path itself was never separate from us. There is nowhere to go. There is only this moment, this breath, this sound of wind through leaves." She paused and looked up at the sky. Clouds drifted like slow-moving continents of light. "When I was young," she continued, "I wanted to find the truth. Now I see, truth was never hiding. It was simply waiting for me to stop searching." She laughed softly, freely. "Even now, do not cling to these words. Let them pass through you like air through a flute. The song does not belong to the flute. It belongs to the silence that moves through it." That night, Anzu passed peacefully in her sleep, her breath fading into the rhythm of the wind. The monks awoke to find a small piece of parchment beside her bed. It read, "The sound of one breath is the sound of eternity. The one who listens is the one who breathes. Rest here. There is nothing more to seek. And so the monastery continued, its bells ringing through the centuries, its teachings carried by the mountain wind. Travelers still come weary from their long journey through thought and striving seeking answers, and finding instead the taste of tea, the rhythm of breath, the stillness between heartbeats. Some stay for a day, some stay for a lifetime, but all eventually realize that what they were seeking was never in the temple, nor in the scriptures, nor even in the mountains. It was within them, quiet, patient, like a candle waiting to be seen. And now, dear listener, as our journey together nears its end, perhaps you too can hear it, the soft echo of that same breath, moving through your chest, calm, effortless, eternal. This is the sound of one breath, the sound of the world awakening through you. There is nothing more to find, nothing more to fix, nothing more to become. You have arrived, not at a destination, but at the heart of being itself. So rest now. Let the words fade. Let your thoughts settle like snow in a silent forest. And as you drift into sleep, remember you are not the seeker, nor the search. You are the silence that holds them both. Welcome home. Before the first dawn, the empty sky within. Before the first dawn, there is a silence so complete that even the stars seem to hold their breath. The world stands suspended between night and light, a soft, eternal pause where time forgets to move. It is said that in this moment, before the first bird sings, and before the horizon blushes with gold, the true nature of existence whispers to those who can listen. Not in words, not in visions, but in the quiet knowing that has no edges, no beginning, and no end. Many years after Anzu's passing, the monastery still stood on its mountain slope, its rooftops shimmering beneath the changing sky. Generations of monks had come and gone, their laughter, their footsteps, their prayers woven into the stones like breath into the body. And those centuries passed, something in that place remained untouched, a stillness that lived beneath the noise of time. It was said that if one sat long enough in the meditation hall and truly surrendered the effort to be still, the mountain itself would begin to breathe through you. The air there was like nowhere else, crisp with pine and snowmelt, but carrying the warmth of human devotion, as though the earth had been softened by centuries of silence. One cold winter morning, long after the world beyond the monastery had changed beyond recognition, a young woman named Hana arrived at its gates. She came not as a scholar or pilgrim, but as a wanderer, someone who had lost her way not in the forest, but in herself. Her eyes carried the weight of years spent searching through cities and books, through fleeting joys and unending questions. She had read of this monastery in an old manuscript, a place where the wind whispered the teachings of long-departed masters. So she climbed for 3 days through fog and frost until she reached its doors. When the gatekeeper asked her what she sought, she said simply, "I'm tired of looking for peace. I just want to stop." The gatekeeper smiled, as if he'd heard those words before. He bowed and said, "Then you are already halfway home." Hannah was given a small cell beside the north wall, where a single paper window let in the pale winter light. Her bed was a straw mat, her comfort silence. For days she followed the monks in their routine, rising before dawn, sweeping the courtyard, eating rice and broth in stillness, and meditating by candlelight. At first, her mind rebelled. It screamed for movement, for noise, for answers. Her thoughts tangled like vines, pulling her in 100 directions. But no one here seemed interested in fighting their minds. They simply watched, as though the storm itself were part of the practice. Slowly, Hannah began to soften. The noise in her head, once deafening, became the background hum of something deeper, a vast space beneath thought, where peace was not something she created, but something that simply was. One morning before dawn, she went to the old pond behind the meditation hall, the same pond where Satori had once watched the moon. The surface was still and dark, reflecting a single star trembling in its depths. As she gazed at it, a faint sound reached her not from outside, but from within. It was the rhythm of her own breathing, soft, steady, eternal. She realized that every inhalation was a birth, and every exhalation a letting go. She had been dying and being reborn countless times each moment, and had never once noticed. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. In that moment, she understood what the masters had meant when they spoke of the empty sky within. It was not emptiness that lacked. It was emptiness that held everything. The same stillness that carried the stars, the same silence that waited before dawn, it was here, in her chest, in her breath, in the space between each thought. That morning, as the first light crept over the horizon, Hannah returned to her cell. She took up a brush and ink, and on a small scrap of paper wrote, "Before the dawn breaks, the sky holds its breath. Before the mind awakens, peace is already here." She pinned the note to her wall, then sat quietly, watching the room fill with light. No voice inside demanded meaning. No question pressed for answers. She simply sat, and for the first time, she was. In the seasons that followed, Hannah became part of the monastery's rhythm. She tended the gardens, taught new visitors how to sit in silence, and often led evening meditations by the pond. Those who met her said that her presence felt like sunlight through fog, gentle, warming, but impossible to hold. When people asked her for wisdom, she would smile and say, "Don't look for peace. Just notice where you're standing when you stop running." Years later, when Hannah too grew old, she called her students together. They gathered in the same incense garden where Anzu had once taught, and where Satori had drawn circles in the sand. The air was still, the wind carrying faint traces of pine and smoke. Hannah looked around and said, "The masters before us did not leave teachings, they left silence. It is our task to listen." She closed her eyes. "When I first came here," she said, "I thought the path was about finding peace, but peace is not found. It is what remains when you realize there is no one left to find it." She lifted her hand and gestured toward the mountains. "Look," she whispered, "the sky is already awake." The monks followed her gaze. The sun had not yet risen, but the horizon glowed faintly, a breath before dawn. And as that light deepened, turning the mist to gold, turning their faces to warmth, the world felt impossibly new, as though creation itself were beginning again. No one spoke. There was no need. The silence was complete, alive, boundless. Hannah passed from this world before sunrise, sitting upright in meditation. Her final breath faded into the mountain air, a sigh that mingled with the wind, the same wind that had once carried Ryanan's ashes, that had circled Mei Lin's temple, that had brushed Satori's cheek and whispered to Anzu in her dreams. the wind that remembers. Long after her passing, travelers who arrived at the monastery before dawn would sometimes speak of a strange stillness. We said that in the moment before the first bell rang, it felt as if the world was holding its breath, as if the sky itself waited for something sacred to begin. And those who were quiet enough to truly listen heard it a faint, steady rhythm, like the sound of a single breath moving through eternity. That is the sound the monks call Mujo no Ko, the voice of impermanence. It is not sad. It does not mourn. It sings softly of the beauty of things that change the way light fades, the way love shifts, the way even stars burn and vanish, only to rise again somewhere unseen. It is the voice that says, nothing is lost, everything moves, and the movement itself is holy. So now, as this story draws to a close, you too may feel that same wind on your skin, the same silence between your breaths. It does not belong to the monks or the mountain. It belongs to you and to the space that has been waiting within you all along. Before the first dawn, there was stillness. After the last sunset, there will still be stillness. And between the two, the brief, beautiful light that we call a life, the sky remains unchanged, quietly watching, quietly loving, quietly whole. You are the sky. The clouds are just passing. So breathe deeply, let go gently, and rest in the empty sky within. The eternal breath, returning to the source. There is a silence that was here before sound. There is a breath that existed before lungs, before wind, before time. And within that breath, unending, unbroken, all of creation rises and falls like waves that never leave the ocean. The monks of the mountain used to say, between each inhale and exhale, the universe dies and is born again. But what they meant was not metaphor. They were pointing to a rhythm, a truth that beats quietly beneath all things. Even the stars breathe, though we do not hear them. Even the mountains breathe, though we cannot see their chest rise and fall. Every form from the smallest leaf to the heart of galaxies is held within this invisible tide. And we too are waves of that same ocean, forgetting for a time that we were never separate from its depths. Long after Hannah's passing, a wandering monk named Ren came to the monastery. He carried no scrolls, no lineage, no robe of status, only a small bowl and a flute carved from bamboo. He had heard stories of the place, how silence itself was the last teacher here. When he arrived, no one questioned him. He was simply given a mat and space to breathe. Days turned into months. He spoke little. He watched the mist move through the pines, listened to the echo of footsteps, and noticed how each sound disappeared into stillness, not lost, but dissolved, like a drop returning to a river. One evening, as dusk fell over the mountains, Ren walked to the same pond where Hana once sat. The water was smooth and golden, holding the reflection of 1,000 autumn leaves drifting down from above. He picked up his flute and began to play. The sound was soft, so soft it barely disturbed the air. Each note rose, trembled, and then vanished, as if it had never existed at all. And in that moment, Ren realized something profound. The purpose of the sound was not to fill silence, but to reveal how infinite the silence truly was. For weeks after that, Ren stopped playing. He no longer felt the need. Instead, he sat by the pond and listened. He listened to the wind, how it brushed against the bamboo, how it sighed through the old temple beams. He listened to the snow falling, the whisper of his robe against the ground, the faint, rhythmic hum of his own heartbeat. He began to notice that the world was not quiet. It was endlessly speaking, but in a language that only silence could understand. And the more he listened, the more he dissolved. The Ren, who had arrived as a seeker, was slowly being washed away, grain by grain, by something greater than thought, greater than identity. One night, as he sat in meditation beneath the moon, he felt the boundary between himself and the world disappear. There was no hearing, only sound. No seeing, only light. No being, only this vast unfolding of awareness, limitless and intimate. It was as if existence itself was breathing him, and with each breath he felt both the immense sorrow and beauty of impermanence, the unending birth and death of all things. A tear rolled down his cheek. It did not fall for pain, but for wonder. At dawn, Ren climbed to the monastery's highest terrace, a place where the monks once came to greet the morning sun. The valley below was filled with fog, and the mountains looked like islands floating on a sea of light. He closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he saw the same sky, boundless, still, infinite. He understood now why the masters said, "The sky is not above you, it is within you." It wasn't about imagination. It was direct, visceral. The same space that held clouds and storms outside was the same space that held thoughts and feelings within. He thought of Hannah's words, "Before the dawn breaks, the sky holds its breath." And he knew what she had meant. For a brief moment, he felt himself expand not as a person, but as awareness itself. There was no monk, no mountain, no sound, only the soft pulse of creation, breathing, breathing, breathing. When Ren returned to the meditation hall later that day, he found a group of young monks gathered around a teacher, debating a passage from an old sutra. "What is the meaning of enlightenment?" one asked. "Is it realization or liberation?" another argued. "Does the self dissolve, or does it expand to include all?" The teacher smiled at them gently and said, "Ask these questions until they dissolve themselves." Ren understood. He bowed and left quietly. For he had learned that every question is like a wave asking what water is. It is not wrong to ask, but the answer can only be found when the wave stops moving. Years passed, and Ren grew old. His hair turned white as frost, and his hands trembled like leaves in wind. One evening, sensing his final days were near, he walked once more to the pond. The bamboo flute was still with him, polished smooth by decades of touch. He sat cross-legged as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The water shimmered with gold and shadow. For a while, he said nothing, did nothing. He simply breathed. Then, without thought, he lifted the flute to his lips and played a single low note. It was unlike any sound he had ever made, soft, infinite, like the earth itself sighing after centuries of dreaming. He played another and another until the notes no longer seemed separate. They flowed together, merging with the breeze, the rustle of the trees, the rippling pond. And in that blending, the music stopped being music. It became pure presence, pure now. As the final tone faded, Ren whispered, "All sound returns to silence. All form returns to the formless. All breath returns to the source." He placed the flute on the ground beside him, closed his eyes, and smiled. When the other monks found him at dawn, he was still sitting there, bathed in light, face serene, as though listening to a sound too vast for the world to hear. After Ren's passing, his flute was placed in the temple hall. No one played it again. It was left there, a symbol of sound that had returned to stillness. Visitors often asked about it. The monks would tell his story and end with the same phrase. The breath that played the flute still moves through us. And indeed, it did. Every breeze that passed through the monastery's gates, every sigh of wind that stirred the leaves, carried with it the same rhythm, the eternal breath. It was no longer Ren's. It was not Hana's, nor Satori's, nor Anzu's. It belonged to no one. It was everyone. To live, the monks realized, is to participate in that breath. To resist it is to suffer. To flow with it is to awaken. And awakening is not a grand event. It is simply remembering that there was never a separate you to awaken. Just breath, just awareness, just the eternal now, endlessly creating itself through your eyes, your hands, your heart. When the world ends, as all forms do, the breath will continue, rippling into the next silence, the next dawn, the next story, yet unwritten. 8. The whisper beyond words. If you are reading or hearing these words now, perhaps you can sense that same stillness between the lines, a quiet hum beneath the language. That is not imagination. That is the eternal breath, the living silence noticing itself through you. Pause for a moment. Breathe in slowly. Feel the air fill your chest, cool, expanding. Now breathe out soft, releasing. That's it. That's the whole path. That's what the monks, the masters, the stories were always pointing to. The source was never somewhere else. It was this breath, this awareness, this moment. Unchanging, unborn, unending. When there is no listener, only listening remains. When there is no seeker, only seeing remains. When there is no doer, only being remains. And so the story returns where it began, to silence, to stillness, to the eternal breath that continues to breathe you long after the story ends. The pathless path, where the river meets the sky. The morning light was soft that day, the kind that doesn't rise suddenly, but seeps gently into the world, like ink spreading through rice paper. Mist wrapped the mountain in thin silver veils, and every pine needle caught a single droplet of dew, each one trembling, each one reflecting the entire sky. The monastery bells did not ring that morning. There was no ceremony, no chant, no announcement of time. It was as though even the world had chosen to pause to breathe in silence, to listen to itself. In the meditation hall, the floor was cool beneath bare feet. The faint scent of cedar and old incense lingered in the air, carrying with it memories of generations who had sat here, seeking peace, finding themselves, and finally learning there was never anything to seek at all. Many years after Ren's passing, a young traveler named Naoki arrived at the monastery gates. He was thin, his robe dusty from long roads, and his eyes carried that same restless longing that so many seekers before him had worn. The gatekeeper monk opened the door and asked softly, "What brings you to this mountain, traveler?" Naoki bowed deeply and said, "I have wandered far and read much. Every teacher tells me a different way to find peace. One speaks of effort, another of surrender. One says, I must awaken through silence. Another says, I must serve, speak, act. I am lost among paths. I no longer know where to walk." The gatekeeper smiled with warmth that came from decades of simplicity. "Then you have come to the right place," he said. "This is the monastery where paths end." He stepped aside and Naoki entered. For the first few days, no one spoke to him about teachings, meditation, or enlightenment. He was simply given a mat in the corner, a bowl for rice, and a broom to sweep the courtyard. Each morning, he swept the same stone path, and each evening, fallen leaves returned to cover it again. At first, frustration gnawed at him. What is the purpose? He thought. I clean, and it becomes dirty. I clear, and it fills again. But after many days of the same rhythm, his frustration began to soften. He started to notice how the act of sweeping itself became a meditation, the scrape of the broom against the stones, the crisp flutter of the leaves, the faint scent of pine rising with each movement. There was no beginning or end to his task, only this simple, unfolding moment. And then, one morning, as he brushed a single golden leaf from the stone, he felt something shift inside him, a quiet click, like a lock turning open. He looked around and realized that nothing was wrong. The leaves were meant to fall, the stones were meant to be covered again, and he was meant to move among them, not to conquer nature, but to dance with it. One afternoon, Naoki was invited to sit with the abbot, an elder monk named Ryoen, whose face was carved with wrinkles that smiled even when he did not. They sat together under the shade of an ancient tree, its roots thick as arms, its bark marked by centuries of wind and rain. For a long time, neither spoke. The abbot simply watched the light shifting through the leaves. Finally, he said, "Do you hear that?" Naoki listened. He could hear birds calling, wind moving through the branches, and faintly, in the distance, the sound of water from the mountain stream. "Yes," he replied softly. Ryoen nodded. "Good. Now, who hears it?" Naoki hesitated. "I do." The old monk smiled. "Ah," he said gently, "then listen again." They sat in silence once more. This time, Naoki tried not to name what he heard. He didn't think, this is wind or this is water. He just listened purely, openly. And for a brief moment, there was no listener and no sound, only the seamless hum of existence, alive, endless, whole. When Naoki opened his eyes, the abbot was still gazing at the trees. Ryoen said, "When the ear disappears, all things sing the same song." As days turned into months, Naoki spent more time alone in the mountains. He would climb to the highest ridge before dawn, sit in the cold air, and watch the first light spill over the horizon. Each sunrise was different, sometimes gold, sometimes grey, sometimes hidden entirely behind mist. But gradually, he stopped measuring beauty by colour or clarity. He began to feel beauty in the stillness itself, in the act of simply being present to whatever the sky offered. One morning, as he sat in silence, a thought drifted across his mind like a passing cloud. What if peace is not something to reach, but something that was never lost? The thought didn't come from him. It rose on its own, like mist rising from a valley. He watched it form and dissolve, and in that dissolution, he felt an immense lightness. He was no longer trying to hold the sky. He was simply the sky, endlessly open, endlessly free. It was on an evening much like this that the abbot called Naoki to join him by the river that ran along the edge of the monastery. The sun was melting into the horizon, and the surface of the water caught the fading light, turning gold and crimson. The abbot pointed toward the river and asked, "Where does this river end?" Naoki thought for a moment. "In the ocean?" he said. Ryoen nodded. "And where does the ocean end?" Naoki was silent. The abbot smiled. "Do you see, my son? The river and the ocean are not two. The river's flowing is the ocean's longing. The ocean's stillness is the river's rest." He then lifted a handful of water, let it flow through his fingers and said, "This is how all things are. Every joy, every sorrow, every breath they rise, they pass, they return. The mistake is to think that the returning means loss. It means homecoming." Naoki felt tears in his eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. The river, the mountain, the breath, they were not symbols anymore. They were himself, and himself was not separate from anything. That night, under a sky filled with stars, Naoki finally understood what the gatekeeper had meant. This is the monastery where paths end. For years, he had thought spirituality was a ladder to climb, each step bringing him closer to enlightenment. But now he saw there had never been a ladder. There was only ground, always here, always enough. The pathless path was not about going anywhere. It was the direct seeing that there was nowhere else to go. He remembered Ren's flute, Hana's dawns, the old teachings that whispered through time. All of them were rivers, and they had all led here to the ocean of this breath, this now. He closed his eyes and whispered, "There is no path to peace, for peace is the path itself." Years later, when Naoki became an elder himself, travelers often came seeking instruction. They expected philosophy, methods, or miracles. But Naoki would simply smile and say, "Come, walk with me." He would take them to the same mountain ridge and stand beside them in silence. When they grew restless, he would ask, "Can you hear the wind?" When they nodded, he would ask, "Who hears it?" And in that question, the same question his teacher once gave him, some would glimpse it, that vast, boundless awareness that needs no answer. The mountain, the sky, the silence, they were all teaching, and Naoki had learned that truth does not need to speak to be heard. When his own final day arrived, Naoki sat beneath the same ancient tree where he had once sat with Ryoen. The light was dim, the air cool and fragrant with the scent of pine. He placed his hands on his knees and whispered, "I have walked far, only to arrive where I began. I searched for peace, only to find it had been breathing me all along." He closed his eyes. Each breath grew slower, softer, until breath itself became the mountain, became the river, became the sky. And then stillness. Not absence, but fullness beyond measure. After Naoki's passing, the monks did not build a shrine or carve a statue. They planted a small sapling beside the river instead. In time, its roots reached deep into the soil, its branches stretched wide, and when the wind passed through its leaves, it sounded like distant whispering, as though the mountain itself was remembering. And sometimes, when evening fell, travelers passing by would hear a sound in the air soft, like a flute, rising from nowhere, returning to nowhere. The monks would smile and say, "It is only the wind, but if you listen closely, you might hear what it's really saying." And so, our story ends not with a lesson, but with a breath. All that was ever sought was never lost. The peace you long for has never left you. You are not walking toward it, you are walking as it. So now, before this moment drifts away, close your eyes. Feel the air enter your lungs cool, alive. Feel it leave warm, soft. Notice that between each breath there is silence, the same silence that has carried this story from the beginning. That silence is not empty, it is full of presence, of life, of you. The seeker disappears, and only seeking remains. The teacher disappears, and only teaching remains. The story disappears, and only stillness remains. The young monk's question lingered in the cool morning air, trembling between sorrow and disbelief. His eyes searched Kosen's calm face, as if expecting, or perhaps needing, to see even a flicker of grief, a sign that his master was still human, still bound to the same ache that gripped his own heart. But Kosen only smiled, a faint curve that softened the deep lines of his weathered face. The breeze carried a wisp of smoke past them, twisting upward like a thin, grey prayer to the heavens. "Tell me," Kosen said gently, "when the fire burned, did it take the sunrise with it?" The monk blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "The sunrise, master?" Kosen nodded slowly, eyes drifting toward the horizon where the first rays of gold began to spill over the charred ruins. "The fire consumed what it could reach," he continued. "Wood, silk, paper. But look, the light still comes. The birds still sing. The mountain still stands." He paused, closing his eyes as the early warmth brushed his cheeks. What was lost was only form. The essence of wisdom can never burn. The monk lowered his gaze, trying to understand. "But those scriptures, master, they were filled with sacred teachings, words of the Buddha himself. How can you not mourn their loss?" Kosen turned to him with eyes that seemed to hold both infinity and tenderness. "You believe wisdom lived in those scrolls," he said softly. "But wisdom is not ink, it is not paper. The words were only fingers pointing to the moon. If you hold on to the finger, you will never see the moon." He leaned forward, his voice a whisper that seemed to merge with the morning breeze. "All those years, I collected words about truth. Tonight, the fire gave me truth without words." The monks stood in silence. The crackling of dying embers was the only sound. One by one, they began to bow, not out of sorrow, but out of a quiet recognition that something holy had happened. The young monk felt tears on his cheeks, not of grief, but of release. He looked again at the ruins, but for the first time, he saw beyond them. In the days that followed, the monastery became a landscape of ash and possibility. The air still carried the scent of smoke, yet life began to return. Wildflowers that had lain dormant in the earth started to sprout among the blackened stones. Each day, Kosen walked among them, silent and steady, his straw sandals whispering against the charred ground. The monks rebuilt slowly, not out of urgency, but reverence. They gathered fallen wood, polished each new beam by hand, and chanted softly as they worked. There was no sadness in their labor, only devotion, and a strange joy in creation itself.